If you're from Fall River, you've probably done some time. That's like high school reunion in Fall River. You go to jail, and, hey, I haven't seen you. Yeah, I've been over here, you know, playing some cards for a while, you know?
Here in Fall River, we're very proud of our achievements. And every year, right here on the waterfront, we bring together hundreds of volunteers to entertain hundreds of thousands of visitors.
Used to be a pretty quiet town until a few years ago.
I remember being one of the persons at the scene. She had like a mark inside of her ear that looked like a knife or a ice pick or something. It was fresh.
The city of Fall River used to be known as the town of Mills, Hills, and Pork Pies. It's also the spot where somebody gave Lizzie Borden's parents 41 whacks or so.
I said, I didn't know about all this stuff that happened here. Everybody thinks of Lizzie Borden. That's 100 years ago.
Lizzie Borden has nothing on the Fall River cult murders.
Police making the unsettling discovery in a wooded area.
They had a series of murders during a satanic ritual in the woods.
If I had a chance to say, would you want an investigation like that again?
Police take away boxes full of bones and satanic paraphernalia.
3 homicides, connected, satanic cults.
Do you wish to sell your soul to Satan?
I'd say, are you crazy? It destroyed my life. I mean, I got divorced in the process, in the middle of it. It consumed me.
They could have just killed her, but they tortured her.
It has also been revealed that her murder was a ritualistic killing tied to a satanic cult that exists among prostitutes and pimps in Fall River.
These ritualistic, barbaric slayings where these poor women, their souls were offered to the devil.
Satan is the pioneer, the inventor.
These headlines, Satan cult killings, Fall River, satanic cults, women found dead, like people were terrified.
My faith in God grew stronger. I prayed a lot. It was all evil.
Without this so-called evil, there could be no change.
I think justice was served.
They arrested him. I said, what do you mean they arrested him? They arrested him for murder. I said, you people are out of your mind.
Grand jury murder indictments were handed down today for the death of 20-year-old Karen Marsden.
Justice wasn't done because the story that's out there is a lie.
I'm going to tell you, I'm not writing a book, and I'm not making money on what I'm doing.
It just doesn't make sense.
I'm doing it because I believe it to be the truth.
This injustice will haunt me.
How do we know what is the truth today?
I don't think you do.
There's a lot of questions, and they're probably all going to remain unanswered.
Nobody knows. I guess everybody who's watching it's gonna know.
How are you feeling?
I don't know. I've never been on camera before, so.
So what did you see?
So when I was probably about, I don't know, 5 or 6, I had told my mother that I had saw these people killing a girl.
I was a detective in the Major Crimes Division. All of those homicides, probably 40 that I was involved with, The details of every one of those crime scenes, all of those bodies, just stick out to me. People will come to me and say, oh, would you talk to my son? He wants to be a police officer. You don't want him to talk to me. It's the worst job in the world. It's the worst job in the world. My beeper went off at close to 6 a.m. in the morning. And they told me to go to Diamond Vocational High School. When I arrived, we had just the EMTs there and uniform division standing by to secure the crime scene. Went under the bleachers where we saw the naked body. If you could see I can see exactly how that looks. She was face down. She was just about completely nude.
There was a lot of evidence at this murder scene. Yeah, I'm just gonna tell you what the facts are. This girl had a baseball bat shoved inside of her. She was tied up with fishing wire. Her head was crushed with rocks.
She had been smashed in the face with a gigantic rock, which we did transport to the FBI lab in Washington. They had some sort of a system down there where they could lift fingerprints, but we were unable to get any prints off that rock.
At that point, we didn't even have an idea of who the victim was.
Our intent was to get her identified.
There were a lot of deaths in Fall River, but there weren't that many out-and-out blatant murders as this was.
I'll never forget that autopsy. It was in the basement of St. Anne's Hospital. There was a basement window that opened, and they had that opened for ventilation purposes, obviously. But there was a young child that was at the window watching the autopsy take place, which was so bizarre. And I yelled, "Hey, get out of there."
They had a composite drawing of her, and that was circulated. And that's how she was initially identified.
We met a friend of hers who ended up coming to the city who made the positive identification.
Doreen Levesque, who was originally from New Bedford, was a transient, and she was homeless, and she did have her problems with her family, and she was on drugs and vulnerable.
Between 1960 and 1973, drug addiction rates among juvenile women increased 6 times more than those of men. Female addicts often turned to prostitution to support their habit.
As time went on, that's when it was determined that she was prostituting in Fall River.
That's a sad story. The only reason why Doreen didn't work the streets in New Bedford was she didn't want people to see her.
I spoke with her father. She was young. She was only 17 years old.
When you hear about the case, you seem to assume that these are women that are much older than they really are.
The prostitute's #1 enemy is not the law, but old age.
Doreen, at age 17, she should be in high school, not working the streets.
And the investigation sort of went in that direction.
There's a lot of drugs and drinking and prostitution and stuff going on there at that period of time, the late 70s into the early 80s.
Fall River, it was a rough place. There were so many girls working the streets in Fall River at that time. There were traffic jams on Friday and Saturday evenings. Could be 30 or 40 women working the street. There was a number of bars in that 4-block area where the prostitutes would frequent. Pier 14, Charlie's was a block further east.
They were tough places. The only people who went in that area were people looking for girls or involved in the business.
There's a very real linkage between these adult entertainment areas and crime.
They were importing a lot of prostitutes at the time from like Providence and the surrounding areas, and they were working the streets in Fall River.
You provide a concentration of activity that is especially attractive to people who want to use sex as a way of committing ordinary crimes.
Sadly, it was a block and a half from the police station.
Why is prostitution so open here?
I moved down to southeastern Massachusetts. That's when I first heard about this case. I don't understand how this type of prostitution continued here in the city, especially so close to the police station. I don't know if someone was paid off. I don't know if someone was paid off to look the other way. There's a lot of conspiracy theories.
These girls were smarter than I ever was. They were beautiful. I want them to remember all these girls because they were so young and they screwed up and they got involved with the wrong people and they didn't deserve this.
Doreen Levesque. I didn't know anything except that she was a prostitute that got killed.
As soon as we learned who Doreen was is when we worked all of that area over. We talked to people then who had been warned to stay off the street.
Anybody who you could talk to, you'd talk to about it. We initially thought it could have been a John.
There were many people who were dangerous, and we ran into them often.
Willie Smith, he was allowing Doreen Levesque to use his apartment for her prostitution operations. I only talked to Willie Smith one time, and he denied any knowledge of anything. We came across Andy Maltese. He got the services of the prostitutes. We brought him down to the district attorney's office with 2 of the Fall River detectives. He initially was a suspect. We interviewed him numerous times, and it turned out he was not involved.
Most of the young ladies who worked the street had someone they were working for.
Their business managers, known more accurately as pimps, will arrange for their bail and early release.
Doreen, she had come to Fall River. That's apparently when she ran into Carl Drew.
We would speak to people who would tell us that Satan controls the street. And who is Satan?
Hello, this is a prepaid collect call from...
Oh, Drew.
It was Carl Drew.
An inmate at Massachusetts Department of Corrections.
Hello.
move the glasses for me. I'm gonna take the microphone and just drop this down the shirt for me. This all the way through for me. Thank you.
How you feeling?
Good.
Good?
Yeah. Yeah. Carl always maintained his cool. If he was stoned, you couldn't tell.
Are you nervous, or how you feeling?
Well, kind of anxious to get this thing going, get it out there. You know, and it's been a long time. You know. Yeah, it's going on 41 years of this stuff. Yeah.
Carl Drew was known as someone who was on the street daily, was a pimp.
I'm originally from New Hampshire. I lived with an abusive father that, you know what I mean, he was an alcoholic and all that stuff. I would get beaten, I mean, to the point where I'd be knocked out. You know what I mean? There's plenty of times I've woken up with handkerchiefs over my nose because he just come right out and sucker punch me.
Carl's father would hang him with a rope into a well as a punishment. Would send him into the water to get dead animals out of a well.
I turned about 14 years old, and I was getting a beating from my father, and I decided enough was enough. I got up and knocked him on his ass, and I left, and I've been living on the streets from the age of 14.
Carl Drew was a street thug. He was violent, he was cruel, he was mean.
So I end up holding up one convenience store in New Bedford. And I end up going to trial, and I end up getting 6 years in a day. So when I got out of prison on that, I had to stay in Fall River because I was on parole.
He was known to be a very violent person. Had a history of control of the prostitutes who worked the street. They were afraid of him.
For some reason, I had a bad reputation out there that people knew not to mess with anything that was mine.
What I knew of the whole situation, he drugged those girls up. So they didn't know whether they were coming or going.
They'd pay me like $200 a week to protect them, to keep them safe on the street.
Oh, he wasn't protecting them, he was using them. If he was protecting them, he wouldn't be sending them out on the street to make money.
Young runaway girls in particular become prey for pimps who make promises of love and protection.
He did not care about them. He didn't love them. Protection, no.
What do you think happens to the ones who don't save any money, turn it all over to the men?
They become Skid Row prostitutes. They end up committing suicide, a lot of them.
Carl Drew, did he know me? No. Did I know who he was? Yes. He liked to manhandle the girls, and he wasn't afraid to use force to make them do what he wanted.
A lot of the cops back then, they just didn't care. They knew this shit was going on, and they allowed it to go on. It was so blatantly out there, you know what I mean? Unless the cops had an attitude towards somebody, they didn't bother them, you know what I mean?
Judges often show reluctance to imprison a prostitute since prisons don't seem to rehabilitate people, but make them more hardened criminals instead.
My friend Diana, when she was doing it, there was a cop who actually would pick her up for service and not arrest her.
Oh, yeah. Believe me, I've run into situations like even cops, that done all this shit. So, I've had parole officers and probation officers that were tricking with girls that actually would handcuff the girls to the beds and all that shit, threatening to arrest them. Most of them, they don't even let them know they're cops until they get them in a hotel room or a room where they're at, and then flash them the badge and tell them, look, you're either going to do this my way or I'm going to take you down the station, blah, blah, blah.
All of our resources were going to, solve the homicides. Carl, unless he was part of that investigation, which he ended up being, he was sort of ignored. There was a lot of fear on the streets of Carl. The retribution that was going to be involved if anybody spoke or talked. We knew all the players, but we could put nothing together that early in the investigation.
Robin's name popped up just about daily.
The bottom line is that Carl was a pimp, and Robin Murphy, she was trying to be a pimp at this time in the same area as Carl.
At that time, Carl, Drew, and Robin controlled much of that trade, and they forbade others from doing that. They were working together, but they hated each other.
I knew Robin very well. I liked her. We had fun. She was a hot shit. She was crazy. And I knew she was not somebody you wanted on your bad side.
Robin had a very rough upbringing. It's my understanding there was allegations of sexual assault, a very troubled background. She grew up very quickly over the years, so violence really was part of her life.
What made Robin Robin? Robin didn't care about herself because she had parents that didn't care about her. Robin didn't seem to have any kind of family situation. Her mother, I think she was a barmaid. She was never there. Her father didn't give two shits about her. My mother didn't give two shits about me.
Robin was only 17 years old at the time, but a very violent person. I watched her have a fist fight with a guy in front of Charlie's.
This guy was 25. This guy ran from her. And she chased him down the avenue, right in the middle of the road, and threw a full beer bottle, trying to hit him in the head. That's Robin.
So I was sitting in an unmarked vehicle. You would think she was a middleweight fighter. She was pretty vicious.
Everybody who knew her said in high school the men were afraid of her. She just had like a, you know, what do you call it, retard strength, or she just had like a, you know what I mean? Like, you seemed like something, when she was really mad, she had a rage that you could probably break a pool stick over her head and she'd still keep coming at you.
Robin could eat pizza and kill you right after that and not bother her at all. It wouldn't bother her at all.
We never got along from the first moment that we talked. You know what I mean? That when you talked to her, you knew you didn't want to have anything to do with her because of her attitude, her disposition, and all.
That's what she wanted. She wanted control. She didn't want to be a prostitute. She was definitely smarter than Carl Drew.
Probably much smarter than a lot of the people she was dealing with. Maybe even us, I don't know.
She hated Carl. Carl was the only one in her way of controlling the street completely. At that age, at 17 years old, controlling the entire street. Doreen had been warned by both Carl and Robin. They wanted that control of the sex dollars, and they wanted her to stay off the streets. She was actually working 2 blocks away from where they gathered. But she was still working the street, and she was still taking Johns, and she was getting a lot more because she was a very pretty young lady.
There's a strange dynamic there of Robin and Carl, and Karen Marsden was caught in the middle of all of this.
Karen and I were best friends. We did everything together. Karen was a good kid with a kind heart. If you were her friend, you were her friend. She was gonna be down for you no matter what. Her mother had gone to jail. I'm not sure why. I don't know what happened to her father. I have no idea.
Karen Marsden is probably that's the saddest case. These are just shattered lives. And they're all tied to Carl Drew.
Karen probably worked the streets for me for probably about a year. She was the kind of person that you wouldn't think that she would work on the streets and all that stuff. We got together and I explained to her what the routine was. And I let her know that it's not a game out there on the street.
I was pretty mad with Cass. What are you doing with this guy? You know? Yeah. She told me that she was prostituting, and I kicked the pole, sprained my right ankle. I was pretty upset with her.
So she insisted that she wanted to work the streets.
And so they turn to the streets to escape the hurt, but find themselves becoming victims once again, returning to relationships with adults who exploit them.
I knew Karen from my childhood. We went to church together. I believe people take two paths in life, and she went on the dark path instead of seeing the light. And unfortunately, I believe she tried to come back and didn't have the help.
They continue to allow themselves to be used because they have come to expect nothing more. And that is why it is so difficult to reach them.
I lived in her apartment with her for a while, and I helped her with her son.
His son was a child, 2 years old, and his name was Jay. He's since died.
Karen loved her son more than life. She loved that boy more than she loved anything in this world.
Well, I'm the father to Karen Marsden's son.
Okay.
JJ.
What's JJ's full name?
Joseph John Alves. Karen was a virgin when I met her. She wasn't no prostitute like everybody says. She used to hang down there because she knew some of the girls, and that's how I met her. But she was a virgin when I met her.
Okay.
Karen, 90% of the time I saw her, she was stoned and drunk.
After the months progressed, I ended up seeing Karen hanging out with Robin. They were like two peas in a pod and all that stuff.
Robin Murphy came out at a young age as a lesbian.
Karen was considered Robin's lover.
See, I don't want to get into the Robin thing. I really don't. See, we grew up in the same neighborhood, pretty much. They were friends. Karen didn't see her like I saw her.
Karen had a child. She had relationships with men, but she also had relationships with Robin. There was a very strong emotional tie or some type of power that Robin had over Karen. She felt comfortable with her somehow, that Robin was going to protect her, particularly on the street.
I did everything I could to get Karen to speak with us. Karen was the weak link. Karen wasn't right mentally. She was emotionally distraught and stayed that same way throughout all of that period of time. We thought she was emotionally damaged as a result of what happened that evening, early morning hours under the bleachers.
That's Karen telling you this?
Karen was telling me that,
She was present when, we're talking about, do you know the girl that was found behind the bleachers? Do you know her name?
That was Doreen Levesque.
Doreen Levesque, right.
She says, come out with me right now. She said, I want to take you to the Diamond Bleachers. There's a girl dead. She said, cow smashed her head in wet rocks. And she was crying, and she had holy water in her pocket.
She was in fear of her life. She said that someone was going to kill her.
So they tied the girl up behind the bleachers. They smashed her head in with rocks, and Carl laughed about it.
She implied that guy Carl that you met, he's going to kill me. I seen too much. I know too much.
So you didn't go up there and see the body?
I didn't go up there and see it, no way.
Okay. Now, Karen didn't come to the police. For what reason?
She was scared.
Every time that I saw her, and I saw her at least 4 or 5 times weekly, she was fearful of even looking in my direction or in the direction of the other investigators who were present.
Karen, she was always totally petrified.
Carl manipulated her. Carl placed her in fear. Carl had her in fear every day he was going to kill her.
They had threatened to party with her son if she tried to leave. And she said, you know what I mean. They're gonna drug him all up. And I said, well, then you can't let people own you. You've got to go tell somebody. You're not an animal. People don't own you. And you can't let them think they do.
It was going to be arranged to have Karen meet us at a house on County Street in Fall River, where Carol Fletcher's sister was staying. Carol Fletcher was someone who worked the street, well known to us. We agreed to go there. When Karen came in that door and saw me, she started to scream.
Karen was really upset with Carl Drew. She called him the devil.
When I interviewed Karen, Karen says, you know, Satan knows who I'm talking to. We started hearing Satan, you know, the cult. It was unusual for Fall River. As an investigator, I hadn't heard the word cult in this community.
Detective Alan Alves of the Freetown Police is an expert on satanic cults.
This is definitely, you know, indications of Satanism. I knew Al and Sylvia. We worked together on a lot of cases throughout the years. Because Freetown's a nice, quiet town. All our crime came from people in Fall River or New Bedford, so I worked with a lot of the detectives from the area.
Karen and other women that we talked to who were involved with Carl Drew and Robin often said how Carl would take them to the Freetown State Forest where they would worship Satan.
Satan is the essence of that which dwells within myself.
Do you believe in Jesus Christ?
No. No. Irrevocably not.
What's it feel like when you're up on the altar during sermon?
Oh, during a ritual? Well, the power starts building up. I guess power sounds like a real corny word, but it's an adrenaline energy that starts building up in you. Don't ask me just why. I suppose it's could call it a satanic ecstasy.
I've been involved in investigating satanic crime for 2 decades in the Freetown State Forest.
With the Freetown State Forest, they were always finding upside-down crosses, and there was always talk of satanic cult activity out there. Alves was always chasing rumors out there.
The detective admits devil worship is a difficult crime to prosecute.
What they do, they have a pentagram. Satan would come out of the center of it. We would find animals with absolutely no blood in them at all. They would drain the blood right out of them. It would be opposite of the Catholic Church, and they would drink blood instead of wine and so forth. And usually with the high priestess of the cult, it would mix with either his urine or with his semen. So that left me out of being undercover over there.
Prior to that, of course, the Charles Manson case really riveted the country.
Charlie, can we get a picture of that?
That whole helter-skelter, the horror of what was going on in California.
Susan, would you answer a couple of questions for us?
So when anyone talked about Satanism, that's immediately what you thought of.
It was happening across the country.
Alpine police say 5 young Alpine men are accused of conducting satanic rituals.
Authorities say Satanism is definitely alive in Tucson.
At midnight on Saturday night, Satan worshippers don their regalia and gather in groups of 13.
They knew what they were doing was wrong by molesting kids or serial rapists or serial murder.
All prayers, chants, and offerings are directed to the dark power of the King of Hell.
Drinking blood is one of the black magic traditions that some satanic covens or groups practice.
But then all of a sudden, here comes a religion that says rape is okay, killing's okay, all that stuff is okay. It's their constitutional rights to practice any religion they want. Our concern is in the exercise of that religion that A, they're not committing any crimes, and B, they're not infringing upon the rights of other people.
Hail Satan.
Hail Satan. There was a fear of Satan, but it was more the fear of Satanism and evil people.
It's not illegal to be a Satanist, and not all Satanists engage in illegal activities, but many do. Some of the illegal activity includes trespassing, cruelty to animals, kidnapping, rape, or sexual molestation of adults and children, and murder.
I never saw a real live ritual, saw the aftermath of it, and I was advised of what went on with some of the people that were in the cult.
I don't know who the true believers were, but they definitely used that to keep the other girls in line, who ended up, believing that there was an omnipresence involved, that no matter what they did, they couldn't get away with it.
Carl Drew, he allegedly called himself the son of Satan. And he kind of looked the part. He had those wild, crazy eyes and the long, stringy hair, and he had this, horde of prostitutes that he controlled with threats and intimidation, and we're gonna offer your soul to Satan.
I always stood in contact with Karen, even though we weren't getting along. I always stood because we had the son together.
Yep.
She said that Carl Drew took her to the Best Western Hotel on Columbia Street. Now it's an assistant living place. And she said brought her in a room, and they tied her up, and they dripped blood all over her, and they walked around her room saying in different languages that she never even knew. She said that big crosses hung from the ceiling upside down and everything.
You have to be a certain bit of a showman in the world in order to get ahead. If someone begs to be misused, then I'll be very glad to oblige.
This was not an organized satanic cult where, they kept a book of shadows or this was self-styled creation by Carl Drew in order to keep people in line. Satan knows, Satan's gonna know, Satan knows everything.
I said, they're gonna sacrifice a human being because that's what's required on Halloween and on May 1st is a human sacrifice. Usually it's a baby.
There's plenty of pimps who are abusive, who, prey on women. They don't have to say, I worship the devil and Satan will take your soul if you don't bring in $200 tonight.
Carl Drew used Satanism. They would meet at different apartments and try to summon up the devil. Obviously, the devil didn't show up, but perhaps Carl Drew was the devil, and they didn't have to summon anyone. He was the one who just brought evil into all of their lives.
Karen that night took me to the forest and showed me this area that Carl had taken her to, and that how they were going to kill her son. Satan was going to take her son's life.
We picked her up, drove around, we looked for altars. We were trying to cultivate a story from her, and she was just incoherent, crying uncontrollably.
She was saying that once Carl knew that she had been talking to me, they were going to kill him.
She wanted to go to St. Mary's Church and talk to a priest.
On the way there, I called the chief of police and I asked him to place Karen in protective custody. He agreed that I could do that. She insisted that she wanted to see the priest and didn't want to be in protective custody.
We dropped her off at the church. She rang the rectory door, the lights came on.
I remember the priest coming to the door and greeting her. I drove away.
That's the last we saw of her. It was maybe the following day when the grandmother got in touch with the police department, and Captain Andrade called Alan and I in. It's about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, if I recall correctly. And he said, you know, that Karen was missing. And at that point, we knew she probably was not missing.
And the longer time went by that she wasn't there, the likelihood of her coming back I would think would be far and few between, you know, it wouldn't happen. I felt like, why wasn't somebody helping her? I questioned, where was God? I felt sick.
The police came to my mother's house on Robeson Street and they questioned me because Karen was missing. And I was like, I don't know who did it, I don't know what happened, and I don't know where Karen is, but I do know she was in some sort of trouble.
Carl Drew, he was a suspect, but he also wasn't someone that we went to on the street to talk to. He didn't make himself available. Didn't want to see us.
Everybody you were trying to talk to would eventually end up at an apartment at Harbor Terrace.
Sonny Sparta lived in Harbor Terrace, which was a housing project in Fall River. That was the main hangout for a number of people at that time.
Sonny Sparta had a history of being involved with drugs, with street crime. She was close friends with all of the players. Carl Drew, Robin, Karen.
Robin had called Sonny one time, and Fall River detectives, they happened to be there.
Sonny allowed me to listen in on the phone call. And while doing so, Robin said she was involved in this. That set in motion Robin's arrest.
She was between a rock and a hard place. She no doubt felt safer with the police than she did with Carl Drew.
They brought Robin over to the district attorney's office. And she looked up, as soon as she saw me, she looked very upset.
At that point, she knew that the state police were working out of the district attorney's office, and she thought that if she needed to get a deal, it would be through the state police.
What happened with Robin is the district attorney's office finally took her into protective custody, and that virtually eliminated our involvement with her.
Well, Robin Murphy goes to the DA, and they offer Robin pretty much a deal right then and there. Robin says Carl Drew forced all of these women to worship Satan and used it as a mechanism to control their money, their take, and that she was forced into this Satan cult worshiping horror show by Carl Drew.
They worship the devil when they have seances with skulls in the middle of the floor, candles, spoken tongues.
Robin doesn't take any responsibility for the murder of Doreen Levesque. Instead, she tells the Bristol County DA's office that Karen, her romantic love interest, told her that Carl wanted to make an offering to Satan.
Karen Marsden informed me that Carl killed him. That he worshiped the devil. And that women didn't do the things that he wanted them to do. He would kill her. He told her that he killed Doreen back. Karen Marsden had told me all about the murder.
Karen had been forced to participate. That Carl told her we have to give her soul to Satan, and that she picked up a rock and bashed the victim in the head, but Robin had nothing to do with it.
That she didn't continue to do the things he wanted her to do, that she found a way to earn the rest as well.
Karen Marsden decided that she wants to leave Carl Drew and Satan altogether. She wants nothing to do with Satan. Goodbye, devil. Well, Karen Marsden had been a witness.
Carl was in total fear that Karen was going to tell the story about Carl's presence and participation with Doreen Levesque's homicide.
The death of Karen was quite simply to kill a witness. To kill a witness to a murder.
Carl Drew was going to kill her. She was dead. The police who knew that she was going to be killed didn't arrest him.
I didn't believe it at the time. But they killed her a few hours after I dropped her off. I think about that often. I knew that she would have a price to pay. I didn't think for a moment that they would kill her. They did.
February 8th, she was killed. Carl Drew was looking for Karen. That's what she was running.
Robin and Karen are on the street. A car goes by, stops. Carl is in the vehicle with a number of other people. Carl says, "Come on, get in the car now." The driver of the car is Carol Fletcher. She's one of Carl Drew's prostitutes. Also in the car is Carl Davis and Willie Smith. Both of them are caught up in the drug culture in Fall River.
We drove to a wooded area in Westport. Carl Drew ordered me to pull Karen Marsden out of the vehicle.
Robin's story was that they pulled Karen out of the car. She punched Karen in the face, ripped her hair out, ripped all her hair out, and threw it on the ground.
She was beaten into the woods. Once we were in the woods, I was ordered to cut her throat.
Karen, she lived with Robin, and they were lovers. They were a couple. And the fact that Robin Murphy was the one who actually slit her throat just goes to show you the level of pure evil.
The state police dogs were hitting on that blood where she was killed, where her throat was cut and she bled out.
Robin, she was afraid of him. Robin wasn't afraid of too many people.
At some point, Carl Drew removed the head from the body.
Robin says that Carl Drew, the son of Satan, told them that they had to participate because they were offering her soul to Satan, and that would somehow indemnify them from any sort of backlash.
Oral sex was performed on his cat's body. It was a ritualistic killing.
We found evidence of where she was dragged over nearly a 2-mile area. Parts of her hair, some teeth, over that area where she was beaten and dragged before they decapitated her.
The body was never found. There was rumors that they were playing soccer with a head in the woods.
I was in my early 20s, you know, when this stuff comes out, it's so shocking. You know, you're like, how can anybody make this up?
Carl actually kicked her skull after she was decapitated, kicked it in the ear. We could only find the upper portion of her teeth and the rest of her skull. We had evidence from others, Carol Fletcher.
And Carol Fletcher took a deal for immunity. The 3 men were indicted for murder. Robin, she turned state's evidence.
It has also been revealed that her murder was a ritualistic killing tied to a satanic cult that exists among prostitutes and pimps in Fall River.
This is somebody who is insanely, barbarically nuts. And whether he did it to offer souls to Satan or he did it because he's a deep-rooted evil wackadoodle, I don't think there's a big difference there.
We were able to determine that there may have been more than one individual involved in the crime.
There was a lot of fear in the city as far as, you know, watch where your children are and what they're doing. I remember my mom being very upset and praying all the time.
When you hear about that and you say, oh, well, there was satanic worshiping and stuff, kind of like, I was wet behind the ears. I thought that sounds right to me. Yeah, that seems plausible, you know? Yeah. Plus, I don't know anything about satanic worship, so you could say whatever. You could say they drink like a can of chicken noodle soup, you know, at 6:30 every night. And all right, if that's what they do, I don't know much about it, you know?
No cops, nobody come and investigated, interviewed me or nothing. I was shocked. It was bizarre, you know what I mean? Like, here I am being accused of all this, you know, cast as being like a Charles Manson thing like that.
I always had faith in the legal system. I never thought that at once would I ever get set up and framed for a murder that I had nothing to do with.
Lots of people in prison say that they're innocent. 25 years ago, I met Carl Drew, 15 years after he'd been incarcerated. What sticks in my craw, what still gives me a lump in my throat, is knowing that he remains in prison. This injustice will haunt me until I die, until he dies, or until he's released. and I appreciate your efforts to document what happened to Carl.
That was one of my biggest fears in life, is going to prison for a life sentence, especially something I didn't do. I mean, I ain't sitting there saying I was no innocent, no angel. I mean, I did stuff. I told them from the get-go. I said, if you're going to get me for something I done, don't fabricate.
It was bullshit. It never happened.
Police take away boxes full of bones and satanic paraphernalia.
Do you wish to sell your soul to Satan? Do you drink blood? According to this note, these are just a couple of the questions you have to answer if you want to be a part of this cult.
It was a made-up story. It was a made-up story to hide from what the truth was.
I was under pressure, big time.
Would you say that they were coaching you on what to say when you
Yes,
get on the
I
stand?
would say that.
There's no physical evidence at all tying Carl Drew to these crimes. Not a single iota of physical evidence.
The night that she was supposed to have been killed, I was at my stepmother's wedding. I had photos of me there.
Carl Drew had nothing to do with these murders.
When we talk about this crime, it's your position that you gave false testimony, correct?
Correct.
Everybody knows it. Everybody.
Fall River. It was a rough place. There were so many girls working the streets in Fall River at that time. There were traffic jams on Friday and Saturday evenings.
Doreen, at age 17, she should be in high school, not working the streets. The brutality of her murder is chilling.
She was face down. She was just about completely nude.
She was prostituting in Fall River. And the investigation sort of went in that direction.
That's apparently when she ran into Carl Drew.
Carl Drew was known as someone who was on the street daily, was a pimp.
For some reason, I had a bad reputation out there that people knew not to mess with anything that was mine.
He drugged those girls up.
Carl Drew. Did he know me? No. Did I know who he was? Yes.
Carl Drew used Satanism as a way to control the women on the street.
So I brought her in a room, and they tied her up, and they dripped blood all over her. I said, that big cross is hung from the ceiling upside down and everything.
Karen was really upset with Carl Drew. She called him the devil. She said that he was going to kill her.
The police came to my mother's house and they questioned me because Karen was missing.
And at that point, we knew she probably was not missing.
Robin was caught in the middle of all of this.
Robin was only 17 years old at the time.
Robin was also indicted for murder. She turned state's evidence.
It has also been revealed that her murder was a ritualistic killing tied to a satanic cult that exists among prostitutes and pimps in Fall River.
Robin says that Carl Drew, the son of Satan, told them that they had to participate because they were offering her soul to Satan.
The state police dogs were hitting on that blood where she was killed, where her throat was cut and she bled out.
Well, that was one of my biggest fears in life, is going to prison for a life sentence, especially something I didn't do.
Carl Drew had nothing to do with these murders. Everybody knows it. Everybody.
They came to my house and they said that I was being arrested for a parole violation for whereabouts unknown. They didn't handcuff me or nothing, and they had me walking down the stairs in front of them. I knew something was up. Back then, you had 15 days to wait before you got a hearing for a parole violation, and on the 15th day, they told me I was going to court.
Grand jury murder indictments were handed down today for the death of 20-year-old Karen Marsden.
You know, the next thing I know is I'm being accused of murder.
Hello, this is a prepaid collect call from an inmate at Massachusetts Department of Corrections.
I got arrested when I was 26. I was numb, really. You know what I mean? I was just like trying to process it all. At that time, I believed in the legal system. You know what I mean? I figured that there's no way they're going to find me guilty.
Carl Drew was initially charged with 2 murders, that of Doreen Levesque and Karen Marsden. But the prosecution ultimately only decided to take one of the cases to trial, and that was the murder of Karen Marsden.
The investigators and the prosecution had a weak case. They had a series of murders. They didn't really have any forensic evidence that tied Carl Drew to either of these murders. And they decided that the Levesque case was so weak that they would rather put that into evidence against him without having to go through the process of trying him and maybe having him acquitted on that case.
They tried me for the Karen Marsden case. They used the Doreen Levesque case as the motive for me killing Karen Marsden. They're sitting there saying the reason I killed Karen Marsden is because she witnessed me killing Doreen Levesque.
Unfortunately, there is this prior bad acts doctrine which allows evidence of prior bad acts to come into evidence simply if it shows motive or a consistent course of conduct, even though there's not been a trial on those prior charges.
The thinking was that Doreen was killed because she wouldn't work for Carl Drew. And no one tells Carl Drew no.
Doreen Levesque, she was a nice girl, and I said, you wouldn't think that she was underage, but then I found out that she was only 17 at the time, and I wouldn't have nothing to do with it.
That's not true. He knew Doreen. She was working the street. He had intimidated. He told her not to work the street. We had talked to so many young ladies on the street. And we had some great informants.
Alan Silby pulled me in the police department and, you know what I mean, asking me if I knew anything about Doreen Levesque and all that stuff. And at first, I didn't even realize who she was.
Spent very little time questioning Carl Drew. But he also wasn't someone that we went to on the street to talk to.
Well, that night that she was supposed to have been killed, I was at my stepmother was getting married, and it was like a gay wedding, and I was there at the wedding. I had photos of me there.
There were many aspects that corroborated Carl's innocence story that had been omitted or trampled under at trial. Carl had a grossly inexperienced attorney defending him.
John Berkness was assigned to Carl for the murder trial. He was a nice man, but I don't think he should have been given that assignment.
I figured you know, I'm all right because I know I wasn't guilty of the crime. And then as the trial was going on, this guy here was so lame. And at the time, I couldn't even read or write. I never had any kind of formal education where it would, when I left school, the only thing I could really write was my name, and that was about it.
John Berkness, he had never worked a murder case before, and after Carl's case, he never worked another one again. So, you know, right from the get-go, he pretty much just got railroaded every which way.
There were these 4 people who claimed to have witnessed Karen Marsden's murder. Robin Murphy, Carol Fletcher, Willie Smith, and Carl Davis. The 2 men were charged and the 2 women were given immunity deals to testify against the men.
They were all connected. They all knew each other. They were all working the streets.
Carl Davis had a reputation of being a real asshole and a jerk and a junkie and all that shit. I knew him on the street and all that stuff from the bars, but I never hung with him. William Smith, I never even met the dude and all this stuff, you know what I mean? He tried to contact me and asked me what was up, and I told him, I said, I don't know you, I don't know what's up. I said, you're getting railroaded just like I'm getting railroaded.
Robin and Carol Fletcher, they were the witnesses that were at the scene.
The deal with Carol Fletcher was an easy one for the prosecution to make because she was there, she witnessed it, but she was not involved with the actual killing.
She was one of these little girls, what they call a barfly. You know what I mean? She would do tricks for draft beers and all that stuff.
Robin, that was a little bit more problematic.
We first heard about Robin Marie from the police, and it was a very different person that they trotted into court some months later. She came in with her little Peter Pan collar and a gold cross on her neck, and she looked like butter wouldn't melt in her mouth.
Robin looked like the girl next door when she was cleaned up. So putting her before a jury was better for the prosecution.
The DA's office gave her a deal for her star testimony. She was given second-degree murder.
In Massachusetts, second-degree murder, there's eligibility for parole. First-degree murder, there's no eligibility for parole.
So if you could stand, Ms. Murphy, as well as anyone here in the room who is here to give testimony, stand and raise their right hand.
I pled guilty in 1981 to the offense on advice of counsel. I gave testimony to the effect that I was present during her murder. I gave elaborate testimony to that effect.
Robin Murphy and Karen Marsden were pinpointed at the home of the foster parents to Karen Marsden's child between 7:45 and 8:30 at night. Robin Murphy showed up at her home in Fall River shortly before 10 o'clock. So that leaves a less than 2-hour window. They allegedly hitchhiked to downtown Fall River, which would have taken at least 20 minutes. They were threatened by Carl and the several people who allegedly were involved in the murder scene. They drove a half an hour from Fall River to this woods.
That's where they dragged her out of the car, ripped her hair out, punched her in the face, ripped all her clothes off of her.
Robin Murphy actually killed Karen Marsden, but she says that she did it because Carl Drew, who was present made her do it, and she feared for her life.
She probably told the truth whenever she could, but if it wasn't convenient, then we'd tell a lie. I think you have to find that she was at the scene and that she knows a good deal more than she's telling, because lawyers are asking very specific questions to get at the information they want. That doesn't necessarily paint an honest picture of what happened.
They drove a half an hour from Fall River to this woods, half an hour each way, and they spent 60 to 90 minutes doing this ritual murder, after which they claimed they burned the body, and it took a long time for that body to burn. So that's about 3 to 4 hours worth of activity that couldn't have taken place in the 2 hours.
Do I think she was a liar? Yes.
They're saying that I did this, that I cut the poor girl's head off and all that stuff.
The easiest story to remember is the truth. When you make up a story, you have no memory to go back to when you retell that story. If the first story is made up, every single time you tell that story, you're going to screw it up. You're going to tell it differently.
Every time Robin told the story, there'd be some little differences, there'd be changes in the story. And as a result, that complicated the investigation. And that could have posed a really serious problem for the prosecution. That's why Carol became such a really key element in the case.
Carol was a friend of Robin Murphy and Karen. She was another prostitute. We spoke to her several times, and she, did admit that she had been there, that it was her rental car that they had used to drive Karen down to Westport, and she told us the whole story of what had happened.
There wasn't any cross-examination that you would expect a real trained attorney. This is a murder case now.
We did get the rental car that Carol had driven with that group that night and had it tested by the State Police Crime Lab for blood. It never found any blood.
Carl's alibi was that he had been in a particular bar and had spoken with a particular bartender that he knew well and several other associates in that bar on that night. And had several people who could corroborate each other.
On February 8th is a Friday. And Friday nights is one of the busiest nights. We were in the pier.
The lawyer got money to hire an investigator and tasked the investigator to go out and interview the alibi witnesses. And what happened was that Berkness didn't bother to talk to the investigator until he checked in with him a year later. And when he checked in with him, he found out that the investigator had died. So he hired a new investigator to go back to these witnesses and say to them, do you remember a year ago when Carl Drew was with you between this time and that time on the night of the murder? I mean, good luck.
I guess what you could say would probably amount to forensic evidence back then is there was a ring on the finger of Karen Marsden. And this girl named Leah Johnson was given the ring by Carl Drew.
Leah Johnson was Carl Drew's girlfriend, and she had some of the possessions, at least a ring, for sure, of Karen Marsden. And she received it the same day, the day after Karen's death.
Remember about 24 years ago, you testified at a trial?
Yeah.
Against Carl Drew?
Yeah.
Do you remember what you testified to back then?
Well, Carl was sitting at the bar on Bedford Street, and I came in and I seen him holding the ring. And while he was holding the ring, I'm like, oh, that's for me. So I took the ring and put it on my finger.
And she brought the ring to the state police and said, Carl Drew gave me this ring. I think it's Karen's. And then Karen's mother went on the stand and said, yeah, that's my daughter's ring.
So how did Carl get the ring if Karen was wearing it the night that she was murdered?
The ring placed Carl at the scene of the homicide.
That's pretty solid, if it's in fact true.
Leah Johnson, also alleged to be a confession witness, who Carl Drew allegedly described a dream that he had in which there was a satanic murder ritual in the woods of the victim, but only as a dream. But none of this satanic ritual evidence had to do with Karen Marsden's murder. It was just sort of coloring.
There has long been a tendency for generations to freak out about the fact that we are all in moral decline.
I'd like to begin with a fact, a simple yet shocking fact, that a moral decay is spreading through our country.
The world's going straight to hell in a handbasket.
And they say that we have a moral decline and that the families are breaking up and there's a drug plague and we're going to lose.
The Satanic Panic was this time, it was the 1980s to about 1995, where there was a moral panic happening all across the United States, and they were kicking over every rock looking for the devil.
Alpine police say 5 young Alpine men are accused of conducting satanic rituals.
Friday morning, we had a call at the Catholic Church. When I arrived, I noticed 2 pentagrams and an inverted cross.
The Puritans absolutely believed in a material Satan who worked on people's bodies. But that Satan goes away for like 200 years and then shows back up in the 1980s.
Police take away boxes full of bones and satanic paraphernalia.
The root to the Satanic Panic actually leaned back into the mid-20th century. That was the time when we were sort of head-to-head against Russia.
In this Cold War, perhaps even more than in a normal war, understanding the communist enemy is terribly important.
They're traitors to America. Why don't we do something about it? They are enemies. They are not Americans.
A way for the United States to position itself as morally superior was to align ourselves with God.
Our Constitution was written by men who put their trust in God.
Christian equals us versus everybody else who doesn't believe in God is evil.
So the USSR became satanic, and we began to incorporate "In God We Trust" into the national conversation. We saw televangelists like Billy Graham waltzing in and out of the White House.
To lead America to the dawning of a new day,
with renewed trust in God.
If you have a culture that's primed to believe that stuff, all it takes is one spark, and you've got panic. In 1980, there was a book that came out called Michelle Remembers. And it was about this woman who had apparently had repressed memories of her childhood and being ritually abused by Satanists. And this was extracted by her psychiatrist. And they published together this book.
Over the course of several months, Hasdor hypnotized Michelle.
I'm going to count backwards from 10
and
to 1.
strongly encouraged her to recover memories of having been ritually abused by her mother and a group of local Satan worshipers. The Virgin Mary literally appears to her and encourages Michelle to go forth and basically warn people that Satan is coming and we're all in grave danger.
That book propelled a decade and a half of fear and paranoia and panic and the ruining of lives all across the United States.
Whether a Satan exists is a matter of belief, but we are certain that Satanism exists. To some, it's a religion. To others, it's the practice of evil in the devil's name. It exists, and it's flourishing.
What Ruth saw when she followed them inside would later be locked away to reappear only for a psychiatrist during a hypnosis session.
There are absolutely people in the mid-1980s who are like, actual Satan is working through people and Satan is coming for our kids and working through our local officials and possibly our law enforcement, whatever.
Ruth tells of a room with an altar, a table with a black cloth on it, and a big book and lots of candles. On the table is her daughter, who's being sexually fondled by most of the men.
My mother keeps her door locked during the daytime, and she used to didn't do that. And most people's just, taking precautions.
It's like anything else. Once it hits the news media, you got 100 people calling you.
Detective Alan Alves of the Freetown Police is an expert on satanic cults.
Some of them are way off and stuff like that. Some you looked into and they turned out to be factual.
Other parts of the country is human sacrifice. We don't want to see any of that.
Our investigation indicated went way up, even to government officials and so forth.
The willingness by police officers and attorneys and even people in the mental health profession to embrace these stories is rooted in the fact that if you are one of the people who's in a moral panic about the devil, you will see patterns which to you are warning signs that the devil is there.
The question is there a well-organized plot, an insidious design right now to program and influence the minds of our children towards the occult and witchcraft?
Yes, there's a vast movement toward the occult within the cartoon and toy industry. 80% of all cartoons deal directly with the occult.
Smurfs representing animated dead people. My Little Pony was satanic. Rainbow Bright. The rainbow was a symbol of the New World Order, and she had an upside-down pentagram branded on her face.
So if the cartoon says that a character has occult powers, then when the child plays with a toy, he is going to use that toy to cast spells or do whatever the toy does in the cartoon, and they imagine themselves with these occult powers.
There was all kind of dolls with the eye cut out because they give the children drugs and everything else when they were molesting them and so forth.
There is great utility in othering somebody else. So if I disagree with you, that's one thing. But if you are of the devil, if you're demonic, if you're evil, well, now, everything goes to a whole other level.
That is what $10,000 worth of burning records looks like.
The Bible says what the standard should be for morality for a young person or for any person, and the rock groups go against what the Bible say.
What out of all of those satanic stories could you ever put your finger on and say, there's proof? There is no proof. It's what anybody believes at any given moment.
There are some very obvious ritualistic markings that will appear on a body that is the result of satanic killings. There's oftentimes a cut that goes from behind the ear all the way down to the throat. Another thing that is oftentimes done in ritualistic homicides is a penis is placed inside the mouth of the deceased person.
I think everybody was starting to realize that, this doesn't make a lot of sense.
The case appeared to crumble, and the charges against all the men were dropped.
A lot of that was found to be misrepresented.
No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. It was crushed.
I'm not saying that no one ever did a heinous deed in the name of the devil because they believed in a literal Satan. But in the larger picture, against the backdrop of the Satanic Panic, almost all of the accusations made that Satan was supposedly behind, all of those just vanished. They dissolved, they fell apart. There was nothing to them.
So are you saying that Satanism wasn't debunked, it was just suppressed by the government?
Yeah.
And why?
Because a lot of important people are involved in it. I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, A lot of important people were involved, even today.
Q is about getting to the truth by educating people about the truth, about what's really going on.
They take children and they sacrifice these children. That's where we are at. It's part of Satanism.
The Satanic Panic continues today.
It's evil!
QAnon, there's a vast satanic conspiracy of democratic pedophiles trying to take over the world. That is straight up Satanic Panic.
My fellow Americans, I stand here with all that feel as I do, disgusted with this lie that Biden has been chosen. This is now our greatest fight since the Civil War. The battle of righteousness versus Satan. Yes, Satan. Because these leftists are evil.
They're doctors, they're lawyers, police officers and stuff, molesting kids and everything else. They shut it down.
Who's they?
The Attorney General's office.
So it's a widespread cover-up to
yes,
suppress
it is.
What's really going on.
Yeah.
People romanticize this case. They are looking at it as this is this satanic cult that's worshiping in the Freetown State Forest, and they're, killing babies and cats and dogs and sheep and whatever, and they've got altars hidden deep into the woods. And that's not what this case was about.
The things that were led into evidence of satanic worshiping and stuff, come on. Ugh. Why was that even let in? It's just a bunch of bullshit.
I wasn't brought up in a religious family. I never studied any kind of religion. My religion back then was women. I just loved being around women.
I'm not saying that Carl Drew necessarily participated in these murders, but I think it's impossible to control women to the degree in which he did without some sort of fear of violence.
It was a short time the jurors were out, and the next thing I know, I'm gonna be called out there and was standing up in front of the jurors, and they sat there and said, guilty of first-degree murder, and I'm in the shock of my life.
Carl Drew was sentenced for all of his natural life to be imprisoned.
I
I was shaking in my pants, dude, you know what I mean? Especially when they came back with a guilty verdict. I'm like, are you kidding me?
After Carl had a trial, the other people he was charged with in the same series of events, their charges were dismissed.
If Massachusetts had the death penalty, this would have been a death penalty eligible case. Undeniably. In fact, the death penalty had just been eradicated right before. So if Massachusetts was a different sort of state, Carl Drew would be dead right now.
Carl is in prison for one case, Karen Marsden's case. The Doreen Levesque case is open. It's unsolved.
I'm Paul Carey. I'm going to tell you, I'm not writing a book, and I'm not making money on what I'm doing. I'm doing it because I believe it to be the truth.
I knew Paul Carey. He was a former police detective sergeant, and he was a friend of my dad's.
Paul Carey, we were very close. I worked with him for probably 6 of my 19 years in Major Crimes Division. He participated in the investigation every step of the way, along with myself and Detective Joquin.
I mean, it was a night detective division. The day guys, I wasn't in charge of nothing days. I was just a sergeant, detective sergeant, but they asked me if I would take over the night detective division, and I said I would.
Alan and I worked nights, and then eventually Paul Carey came down and started working nights with us.
Nobody worked the case except me and Alan and Tommy Joquin.
So when I was like 18 or 19, Paul Carey came by and he had said he recently retired. He had mentioned that he was going to be teaching some classes just part-time, you know, at local colleges or whatnot, just to stay busy because he didn't want to sit around doing anything, and that he was going to be a private detective. So, and I was in community college at the time, and he came by and dropped off a couple of milk crates of the actual trial. And he said, why don't you take a look at these, read these, tell me what you think. He goes, now, just so you know, all of these cases were my case. I was the detective sergeant of the team at the time, and I just want to get to the bottom of it.
That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to get the wheels of justice to move, and it's so hard to do under the circumstances because so much grass is growing underneath.
He dropped off like 4 or 5 more milk crates of daily logs, day by day, of what was happening. And I started with the very first day of the Doreen Levesque body being found, and went all the way until the day they arrested Carl Drew.
I remember being one of the persons at the scene of the Levesque murder, and she had like a mark inside of her ear that was like looked like almost like a knife or a ice pick or something, and there was a mark inside her ear. It was fresh. And her anal area was extremely wide open. You know, so, I mean, of course, I'm not a doctor, and I don't know what that means.
Now, this wasn't like I sat down casually while watching Wheel of Fortune. We're talking a lot of stuff here. He said, so now that I'm retired, it's been my mission for years. I've known this guy's been innocent. I just couldn't prove it while I was still a part of the department.
If Drew was to get out tomorrow, I might have one beer with him, but I don't want to be his buddy. See, the bottom line is, he didn't commit the murder, see?
Paul told me that he would go to the jail to meet with Carl quite often, which was a shock to me.
Until the day that Paul died and passed away, he's always believed in my innocence.
He wanted to speak to the district attorney at the time, asked me to speak to the district attorney to talk about Carl Drew's innocence. I thought it was all very strange.
Alan was his own best friend, right? Only 3 people in Alan's life. I, me, and him. It's all him. It's all him. He's an eye person, eh? He's an eye person. I'm surprised he doesn't have a sore back from patting himself all the time, you know? I could tell him I said so.
He's like, I like to track down everybody from the trial, just get the truth. If they all come back and say, you know what I said there was the truth, and he did it, he said, then fine. And he asked me if I would help him do that. He said, you're good with computers. You know, here's a list of names of people. Can you find them?
Paul begins a 6-year hunt for Carol Fletcher and Leah Johnson. And these were not easy people to find.
We tracked down Leah Johnson first. She was locked up for drug charges, cocaine. And so we'll find out when she's gonna get out. We were right in front of the prison when she got out. And Paul rolled down the window and he goes, Leah. And she looked, she's like, yeah? I go, come here, you remember me? And she looks at me, she goes, yeah, you're Paul Carey. And he goes, that's right, you need a ride somewhere? She goes, well, yeah, if you wouldn't mind.
I'm sitting with Leah Johnson and Christopher Hayes.
Paul had been working on this for, what, 32, 33 years.
And the conversation is regarding testimony she gave in 1980 or 81 regarding the Karen Marsden murder case, which resulted in a life sentence for Carl Drew.
You know, it's chilling to hear his voice on there.
Go ahead, Chris, you asked the question.
Okay, Leah, now he gave you a ring. Now, was that a real diamond ring?
Maybe it wasn't a real diamond, I don't know, you know.
Did he say it was Karen's ring? Did he?
No, he did not.
Leah Johnson said, oh yeah, you know, the whole ring story, that's a bullshit story.
If I said in court it wasn't true, I was under pressure, big time. They wanted me to go to Vicksburg, go on trial, and I kept on saying no, and I was running from them when I was working on down by the pier. You know, so after they caught me, they pinned me in.
Testimony is supposed to be voluntary. And a prosecutor can always say, like, I decided not to charge this person with this other crime and give them immunity in exchange for their testimony against this person. Now, telling someone that you're not going to send them to prison if they testify for you is inherently coercive.
And what they say would happen to you?
I would do a vid. I would do a serious vid.
Who told you that? Anyone in particular? Or?
No, I'm not elaborating on that. Just take my word for it. It was a choice between me or Carl.
You say it definitely wasn't true, Leah, that...
It wasn't. They boxed me in, so, you know, I couldn't get away, and that's when they brought me to see the girl's head smashed in, and...
Oh, they actually showed you that?
Yeah, so many things.
Before you went to court or anything?
Yeah,
Oh, my God. And what did they tell you how it happened?
They said, this is what your boyfriend did.
Oh, my God. They said that to you?
Yes, they did. They were very arrogant and adamant about trying to put this on Carl.
So would you say that they were coaching you on what to say?
Yes,
when you got on the
I
stand?
would say that.
She signed an affidavit, she's recorded, she recants her testimony knowing she could get in legal trouble for that.
The chances that he was going to find these people was pretty slim, much less find them still coherent, much less find them willing to testify.
We located Carol Fletcher. She was in a shelter in Baltimore, Maryland. Me and Paul drove down there early in the morning. We left at like 4. We got there probably around lunchtime, something like that. And we walked in there and I asked for Carol.
Today's the 23rd of May, 2003. I'm at the home of Carol Brooks. It was Carol Fletcher in 1980.
She's a very fragile, nervous wreck. She's got tons of anxiety. She's on a bunch of medications. And you can sit and just see when she's talking in this interview, I can remember that tape when you're playing it.
I remember Robin telling her things that Carl Drew would do this or do that. she started bringing us places and telling us that that's where Carl Drew was going to kill us at.
So she really had, she really put you in fear of Carl Drew.
Right.
She's just saying, you know, well, he wasn't there.
Now, you were never a Carl Drew fan, so you have no reason to tell me a story that he wasn't there. The only reason you're telling me because he wasn't there, I assume.
I really didn't know Carl Drew from Adam, other than from what I heard from people.
This was a long process. It took some time to get her to open up. After, you know, many pots of coffee and many donuts.
I know there is, Carol. It's a bitch trying to think of it all. I hate to even be asking you about it, but it's so important that all these things come to light now that we're finding out that we didn't know before.
Carol finally broke.
You were driving around, Carol, on February the 8th around whatever time it was.
Yeah. 7:38, somewhere around there. A little while later, I ran into Karen right around the hub, and she got in the car.
Did you go anywhere then, or did you just...
We drove around at least a couple of times talking. We stopped and got some beer, cigarettes. Karen, she had admitted that she was there at Dorian Levesque's killing.
She said that to you?
Yeah, she said that she was there. They made her go.
But she didn't say who it was?
No.
Or who was there?
No. She said, you know, if anything happens to me, please don't let nothing happen to JJ. She didn't know who to trust anymore. She was like...
She told you that?
Yeah. And then a chick pulled up on the side, car pulled up on the side. And he said...
What kind of car was it?
It was a green Duster.
A green Duster, yeah.
And the car pulled up on the side, asked her how much. She said 35. He said, okay, so she got out of the car, got in the guy's car, and left.
And then what did you do?
Then I rode around a little bit, and then I went to Harbor Terrace because I figured that she'd probably go down there looking for Robin. So I went down there, and they were standing outside. There was a blue car, and they were standing outside arguing in front of.
She said, this is what really happened, was that Karen was coerced onto the roof of Harbor Terrace. Carl wasn't even there. It never happened in the woods. It was on the roof of Harbor Terrace, which blew us away. We had no idea about it.
How was Karen? Was she in...
She was crying.
Yeah, she was crying, huh?
Yeah, she was crying.
Robin pulled out a knife, grabbed her by the hair, pulled out her knife.
You saw what you saw, and you don't know whether she was killed, but you saw what you saw, and you left.
Right.
On the roof. You saw her pulling the hair out.
Pulling her hair out, and I saw the knife.
And the knife, and you left.
Yeah.
So.
I'm not sure if she had killed her or just hurt her. I wasn't sure.
The revelation that we got from Carol that no one had ever gotten before was that Carol witnessed Robin Murphy killing Karen Marsden, or she was right nearby when it happened.
Robin Murphy actually killed Karen Marsden. The DA's office made a mistake.
Here was finally independent evidence that Murphy had killed Marsden without Carl Drew being present.
She beat the Fall River Police Department. She got away with murders. Then she went over their heads and went directly to the prosecutor.
Like I've been saying from day one, you know what I mean? It's shame from the Fall River Police to the state police and the Bristol County DA's office. They're all manipulated by this group.
Robin masterminded all of this. I say she was the mastermind. Yeah, she was. At 17 years old, she was able to convince a district attorney and the courts Carl was going to kill her, and that she had no choice but to testify against Carl for what he did.
You know, you have to give credit to Robin Murphy, you know? The only thing you can say is that she's a lot smarter than all the fucking people involved in the case.
First, I'm hearing from those who are here to speak in support of your release on parole, and then next to hear from those people who are here to speak in opposition to your release on parole.
I filed the motion for new trial in September of 2003, but in May of 2004, Robin Murphy came up for parole.
Because you solemnly swear the testimony that you give to the Massachusetts Parole Board is
Detective Sergeant Paul Carey never really thought talking to Robin was going to be beneficial, because Robin is a manipulator. She was up for parole soon. She's not going to tell on herself.
Is it fair to say that individuals were convicted in part based upon your false testimony? Yes. When we talk about this crime, it's your position that you gave false testimony, correct?
Robin Murphy manipulated them. She committed these crimes.
Has there been any attempted contact by Mr. Drew? No. And he's still incarcerated?
So you lied on the stand concerning what Carl came out, right? Yes.
Robin Murphy came before the state parole board and admitted to them that she had lied. And also, she denied killing anybody.
It was a really alarming parole hearing, and the parole board member said, hold on, let me get this straight. You're saying that you lied? Do you not have any remorse for this?
I think that's part of the rehabilitation process. Again, Ms. Walsh, if I were to tell you that I did this crime and what a horrible thing it was, I'd be lying. That's not rehabilitation. That's the same person that I was in 1980.
She made up this whole story about Carl.
Ms. Murphy, you gave the police statements that after Miss Marston was dead, that you performed oral sex on her, that you cut off her head and that Mr. Drew kicked it around. Why would you implicate yourself in such unhuman, if that's the right word, behavior?
It makes it believable.
It was all bullshit. All bullshit.
Quite frankly, it bothers me that no one knew that. Then, at 41, I'm looking back at this and saying, you're right, it is, it's horrible. But boy, it keeps your attention, and you want to believe it.
If Carl had the opportunity to testify against Robin, I think he would have. He could have done that if he was given the same offer, but he wasn't.
Part of the reason I'm looking for release is I've done 24 years incarcerated. My record does not reflect violence. My record reflects everything that shows I'm rehabilitated.
After listening to her testimony, the parole board, the state parole board, paroled her. They believed her enough to put her back on the street after she'd pled guilty.
She beat the parole board by saying, I'm a changed person and I'm gonna be a good girl, I promise. And she was able to get out again, even though they knew she had changed the story.
I tried to speak to Robin. I went to her house. I reached out to her attorney. She steadfastly refused to speak to me. I think I got her on the phone once, and she called me a liar. She hasn't told her story. You know, it's funny, I kind of lost track of Robin Murphy shortly after she was released, and I was really hoping that they put her back in prison.
Robin was finally granted parole in early 2000s. She was released. She was out for about 7 years, till 2011. She got into a relationship with another felon, and unfortunately that violated her parole conditions.
Miss Murphy, you pled guilty and you were committed on a second-degree life sentence as a result of your plea.
Yes, sir.
Since that time, you were paroled in 2004, correct?
Yes, sir.
You're now back on a revocation?
Yes.
Of that parole?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
My regret in all that is no one will ever find out what really happened. Because what I said has now become what happened. So the real story will really never come out.
Hello, this is a prepaid collect call.
I don't know how personal these conversations would be. It would depend on who's around, but literally around me that can eavesdrop on me. I'm pretty much an open book, but some things are just really personal. People just don't know a lot about me.
How you feeling? Exhausted. Yeah. 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 I like how you know a lot of pieces, and it seems like no one else ever put any of that together. I don't know that I just find it amazing. That's crazy. I tried really hard numerous times to tell the truth. No one cares. I wish that people really knew what really happened.
They had a series of murders during a satanic ritual in the woods.
Carl Drew was initially charged with 2 murders, that of Doreen Levesque and Karen Morrison.
At
that time, I believed in the legal system. You know what I mean? I figured that there's no way they're going to find me guilty.
There's no physical evidence at all tying Carl Drew to these crimes.
That night that she was supposed to have been killed, I was at my stepmother's wedding. I had photos of me there.
Robin was also indicted for murder. She turned state's evidence.
I pled guilty in 1981. I gave testimony to the effect that I was present during her murder.
Robin was only 17 years old at the time.
Robin was caught in the middle of all of this.
The bottom line is that Carl was a pimp and Robin Murphy, she was trying to be a pimp at this time in the same area as Carl.
Robin wanted control. She didn't want to be a prostitute.
Robin could eat pizza and kill you right after that.
You know, Robin is the one who was the main character in putting him away.
Robin Murphy came before the state parole board and admitted to them that she had lied.
Robin masterminded all of this.
You know, you have to give credit to Robin Murphy. The only thing you can say is that she's a lot smarter than all the fucking people involved in the case.
I think it's amazing that you're uncovering a whole lot of things, which basically lets somebody know that I was telling the truth, I've tried to tell the truth. And now I'm just not gonna lie anymore.
Still camera.
Why?
Just because it will help. It's a visual and it will just help.
Sure. The stories I told, I want to take personal responsibility for. I'm not looking to say, oh, well, the DA did this and the police officers did that. I'm not doing that. I tried really hard numerous times to tell the truth. No one cares. I wish that people really knew what really happened. I thought I was all grown up at a very young age. Probably because of the things that happened, didn't allow me to be a kid.
Robin had a very traumatic childhood from, I would say, preteen years on. I think she kind of fell through the cracks. Nowadays, I think Department of Children and Families would be involved, and unfortunately that wasn't the case back in, the 70s.
I met Robin Murphy. She was 12 and I was 12. My family pretty much fell apart when I was 10. My father became a very abusive alcoholic. I ran away. She gave her mom a phone call. Her mother didn't even know me. And she let me stay at that house.
I met her when I was about 12. I felt bad for her. Wanted my mother to take her in.
I think her mother was working at a bar. There was no parent in that house at all. There was no parent. Like, altogether, I probably saw her mother when I was living there like 5 times.
With pretty much having an absent parent, yeah, kind of had to make my own decisions, and I realized there was nobody there, so there was that clingy thing to whoever was there.
Her father was living on County Street in Fall River, and twice I walked from one side of the city with Robin because she wanted to see her dad.
I told my mother I wanted to go live with my father at one point.
Her dad wouldn't even open the door, said, "Go away, I'm married." She wanted to be accepted by her dad, and her dad certainly didn't accept her.
I was like, yeah, no, I don't do this anymore.
Robin was like the head of the household at 12. She'd be the one cooking that terrible chicken with those russet potatoes and a can of corn every damn night. Robin had 3 brothers. Bobby, the oldest brother, Mark, and Kelly. She was just totally on her own. 12 years old. You know, Bobby, her brother Bobby, used to rape her, and nothing, you know, everything was always hush-hush. Everything was hush-hush back then. She said, "I don't want to get pregnant from my brother. My mom won't love me anymore."
I think with Robin, I think there's a denial factor, and maybe at that age not even knowing it's wrong, you know, maybe having an inkling that this is inappropriate, but not really understanding the gravity of what was happening.
Did you try and talk to people about it?
I did. Deaf ears.
Yeah.
My oldest brother acted like things never happened.
Bobby was older than Robin. His birthday was in November. That's all I remember. But he was 16. Yeah. 4 years older than Robin.
I think as far as parenting goes on my mother's side, she did her best with what she had. That's it. How do you deal with things? I think in her generation, you dealt with things by sweeping them under the carpet. You don't take them out into, you know, to other people.
I met Robin, I want to say I was 16 or 17 years old, which makes this young lady 11 or 12. Very young. I had seen her around town in Fall River because I wasn't too far away from Fall River, and I had some friends in Fall River, you know, and I had family members that were in Fall River. So I would see her here and there. And I had heard conversations about her being around in my father's life.
Andy Maltese, he was very active on the street.
I was in front of the Superior Courthouse. Lived near there, about half a block. And he gave me a ride down the street.
How old?
11.
And Andy was the strangest character, probably of all. You could walk the streets of Fall River for a month, and you will not see anyone with cowboy boots and a buckle that says Texas on it and pearl buttons. Andy Maltese was dressed that way.
He did wear boots, and he did have a big, I guess, Western belt buckle. I don't know exactly how to describe him. We didn't go out to dinner.
He was a character. He was a character. He was an older guy.
He lived with his mother, first of all, and he was like a wimpy guy. I don't think anyone thought much of Andy.
I was molested and raped by Andy Maltese, starting at age 11. I wasn't performing cult meetings in the Freetown State Forest. Andy was molesting me in the Freetown State Forest.
She just ended up, I think, being re-victimized over and over and over, starting at 11.
Andy was a pedophile, basically. He liked young girls. He would drive around and find these young girls, and people like that, they're predators.
He had a pattern of what we would now say is grooming, you know, get in her good graces and get her things and take her around and, you know, eventually sexually abused her.
He actually took me to meet his mother at one point, which I found very weird.
My dad was always a part of my life, whether he was home or not home. My mom and them separated because my dad would like to go out at night. He liked younger women. I mean, I don't know what to tell you, but that was just his thing.
I know that at one point, the school that I was going to, maybe I was in 7th grade. The school called my mother and wanted to know who the man was in the red car that was waiting for me every day, and that was Andy Maltese. My mother asked me, and I told her it was none of her business, and that was good enough. I don't know if it's she didn't care or she just didn't know what to do about it.
No one stood up for her. You know, she kind of had to learn to handle things by herself, and had a very skewed view of what's appropriate and what's not appropriate, and very limited trust in people.
Robin Murphy tried to find other victims so she would not have to have any kind of sexual relationship with Andy Maltese. Andy Maltese. He was going to give me a ride home, and she told me he'd be safe, and he wasn't. He raped me repeatedly. Nobody knows. I guess everybody who's watching it's going to know about me now, but it's okay. He tied my hands behind a pine tree. And he was masturbating and then broke my virginity. And then he put a stick in my vagina and told me if I said anything, my parents and my sister were gonna be dead. And I didn't want him to kill my parents or kill my sister. I went to the police station and told them about Andy. They wouldn't even take my statement because I was only 12. They didn't care. They didn't care.
I guess it was something that was overlooked. And I don't mean to put men down, but it seems like men were always privileged and women were not.
Nowadays, the lens on that is much different, but even through the police reports and looking at stuff, it does appear that they really just were no big deal.
Were you pursuing him as a sex offender at all?
No.
Why not?
No, because at that time, we were just interested in the homicides.
They didn't care. They still don't. They still don't.
The only defense Robin has is she was sexually abused and brutalized as a child. And psychologically, that damaged her. but she isn't fit to be among society. I consider her a dangerous person.
He didn't give a flying fuck. There you go, I'm sorry. For God's sakes, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy.
I don't know. I think it may have been the time. People in the 70s and even the early 80s, child rape cases were not pursued the way they are today. They may have thought that it was consensual, so it's all okay. It's not.
Okay. There was a long relationship with Andy Maltese.
Yes.
About roughly 6 years? Since you were 11 or 12 years old?
Correct.
He was 44 at the time, right?
Okay. I'm really not sure.
Okay. Something regarding your childhood, and you know, uncontroverted trauma that you experienced when you were very young. It accounts for a lot of your actions, but there are a lot of things that does not account for. And you know, when a lot of things you took it upon yourself to make this so much more complicated.
Andy bought me 2 puppies after he molested me, and he did call my parents' house one time, and my father picked up the phone. My dad knew something was up, but he didn't say anything. That made it worse for me. That made it worse for me. Andy killed my other puppy in front of me. He says, now this is gonna be your father. That experience has traumatized my life for the rest of my life. The nightmares don't go away.
A lot of times, kids who are victimized and abused continue to be victimized and abused by other people. You know, almost like they have a target on them. I think with Robin, it definitely impacted any form of any close relationship she had with anyone.
What did you perceive as behaviors or character traits that you needed to address during your incarceration to be rehabilitated?
I would say anger, but the anger came from hurt, and that came as a result of abuse and neglect. Abuse from male figures, and neglect from a mother figure who was kind of not there. She was busy trying to make ends meet to bring up 4 kids. If you don't walk through that and you don't forgive the past, then you don't get to grow up, and you stay angry.
Robin, she got pregnant, had a son. I believe she was barely 16.
I had a gay brother. He was 2 years older than me. I got pregnant by one of my brother's lovers at the Holiday Inn, actually. Yes, drinking shots of tequila. When Robin told me she was pregnant, I went to the house and we talked. She said I was raped and I'm effing pregnant. And her mom took the child. I think having a baby and being gay, at that point she was gay, that really messed her head up.
I mean, I know she doesn't want to talk about it. I think in a broad term of, you know, getting pregnant, I think it kind of forced her to grow up quicker than I think any teenage parent ends up having to do.
Everything spiraled with Robin. The older she got, having a child, hormones after having a child at a young age. depressed all the time.
I lived at home until I was 16. For my 17th birthday is when I transitioned into living with Sonny, Maureen Spada.
Sonny Spada, she was a friend of Robin's, and they were allegedly having a lesbian relationship.
Sonny Spada had a history of prostitution, and she lived at Harbor Terrace, which was a housing development no longer in existence.
Robin was over there constantly, and Sonny was friendly with Carl Drew. She was friendly with the whole group.
I know that I never enjoyed the company of men sexually. So we kind of hung at the gay bars. I met Sonny there. She seemed nice. That got different really quick, but at the time she seemed nice.
We spent a lot of time in Sonny's apartment. It was a place for us to meet. It's hard to understand it. Why would they want the police detectives around in Sonny Spada's apartment? But they thought they could gather information from us. We knew we could get information from them, and they were too afraid to keep us away.
The amount of time we spent with these girls is incredible.
To me, they were never cops. They had badges. They just didn't operate like police officers.
There was some concerns about how Fall River was getting information from informants. They were perceived as hanging out with them too much, drinking with them, at least the perception was that they were getting too friendly.
We were given the green light by our commander at the time, so anything that we had to do to do that included us bringing alcohol, marijuana into the apartment. We did it.
You had girls being exploited, and they just weren't particularly concerned about the exploitation factor of those girls.
I was with a friend. We went to buy marijuana from someone, and Carl Drew was seated on a couch. Because I remember backing up and saying, "Come on, I want to get out of here." He just had an icy stare. I didn't like the look of him.
So I ended up meeting Robin at Sonny's. We didn't get along, and she had an attitude when she talked, and you're supposed to pay attention to her or listen to her, and I was above and beyond all that stuff.
He was just a really intimidating guy. Hearing stories about him, I didn't believe them. They just seemed too out there to be true. I really thought he worked on people's fears.
Robin had this disposition that she tried to act like a man, and we're having a heated argument. And I got to a point where I wanted to punch her, but I didn't. I ended up open slapping her and knocking her on her ass.
Carl had come to Sonny's house, and Karen Marsden was with him. And he was upset with her for some reason. Karen was seated in a chair where I couldn't see her. Carl kept pacing back and forth. So I got up, pissed off, went in the bathroom. And she said, "What's the matter with you?" I said, "He's a jerk." Karen Marsden, she was a sweet person. She was concerned about her son. For a 17-year-old, yes, I loved her, yes. It was somebody that was there. She told me her introduction to being a prostitute for Carl was, she told me a story about him choking her one night at the Holiday Inn. She passed out, and when she woke up, she was laying on the bed and he was dripping blood down on her forehead. She was deathly afraid of him. Carl decided he should take her car and basically had her doing drugs. Very unfortunate. I took her to the Corrigan Mental Health Unit. I needed somebody to look at her and try to help her. They gave her Haldol, whatever the heck that is, and sent her on her way. That was how they treated that, drugs with more drugs and more drugs. I noticed recently that my involvements with people have always been with broken people. I wish Karen could have had a good life.
Robin's father let her down for not caring or having the time for her. Then you got Andy, and then you got Carl Drew.
They have, you know, made their case on Robin being a central figure in this and her being a main perpetrator. Instead of a victim, she fell in with this crowd of people, Carl Drew included, who was a known pimp in Fall River and in his 20s at the time. So to put it on her that she, at 17, you know, was pimping out other girls who were older than her, I think was very short-sighted.
Robin did a lot of intimidation, not only with Karen, who she totally controlled, but she did a lot of intimidation with everyone else who worked the street. Keep in mind, Robin was only 17 years old at the time, but a very violent person.
They weren't fully grasping, you know, that she was an exploited victim.
She may have been a child at 17 years old or considered a child. Robin didn't need any protection.
So there's this group of prostitutes, and they're being controlled by Carl Drew, who's a motorcycle tough guy, and a 16-year-old girl. She doesn't seem to fit.
Just as violent, if not more. You look at her, you'd say, oh, you know, she's sweet and innocent. That was not the case.
It's very frustrating to have people, even now, refer to her as, you know, a prostitute or as a pimp when she was clearly victimized and was trafficked herself in with this group of adults.
I was on call that weekend, Doreen Levesque. We found her under the bleachers at Diamond Vocational High School in Fall River. She had been severely beaten and was, you know, killed.
Karen said that Carl killed the girl under the bleachers. I insisted, nah, he just told you that to, you know, get you to walk right. And she told me she was there when it happened.
That's Karen telling you this?
Karen was telling me that,
She was present when, we're talking about, do you know the girl that was found behind the bleachers? Do you know her name?
That was Doreen Levesque.
Doreen Levesque, right.
Karen used to call me on the phone all the time. You know, Drew's gonna threaten her. I said, Karen, we'll take care of you. We'll move you somewhere. We'll do something for you. No, I don't want to go. I don't want to leave.
So Carl smashed her head in wet rocks, and she was crying, and she had holy water in her pocket.
Doreen was the first victim. But the most astonishing thing is that before the Karen Marsden murder, Robin Murphy had been a witness to the murder of another young prostitute, Barbara Raposo.
That homicide involved Andy Maltese and Robin. Carl wasn't present. None of the other actors were present.
I don't like to bring that up, I have to say, because Andy died.
A wooded area, but clearly seen from the road. You could drive in there. It was a sort of a lover's lane. There was a gentleman who was walking his beagle dog. The ground was frozen, and the dog went over was licking the dead body.
That was a Saturday in January, and it was cold. And she was frozen solid. Her face was smashed in. In the area where we found her, There were some cement blocks. The cement block did serious damage to her face. She was severely beaten.
Body was completely frozen, rock solid, when we removed it from that location.
What we did was interviewed everyone we could think of that was directly or indirectly involved with her.
We tied the connection together that she was Andy's girlfriend, and it developed from there.
The only time I knew of Barbara is when he spoke with me about having a female in his life, and that he had a new woman in his life, and that he really cared for her, and that she really needed his help.
She was 17 and he was 40. And she started dating him. I tried to get her away from him, but she thought he was great. Because at first he was nice, but then he started, you know, giving her more and more drugs. I was best friends with her sister since 2nd grade. She told me when Barbara was 5 months pregnant that it might be Andy's. She had a son.
She was younger, so, you know, a lot of people take that like that's a bad thing because it was like probably a 20 years age difference. But I have aunts and uncles today that are that far apart, and they're still married.
Barbara was I'm gonna cry, was a good girl. She was in grammar school. She did all the right things. That's why I'm here. I don't remember them talking about her at length ever. I don't remember any pictures of her. She was a beautiful girl. And justice wasn't done for her.
I really didn't know much about Barbara until we found her body.
The night that she disappeared, she was thinking of leaving, and she was getting a clearer head. And she was finally thinking, I have a life to live, I have a son, I'm gonna fix this and get out. And she disappeared, and she was killed.
Barbara was affiliating, is probably the correct word, with this other guy. But Andy was jealous of the relationship.
That's really a part of an abusive relationship. She wants to leave Fall River. She wants to move on with her life because she is really only a kid. He doesn't want her to leave. Andy was the main suspect in the case.
I was 100% convinced that he didn't murder Barbara Raposa. The medical examiner testified that from the wounds he saw on Barbara Raposa, whoever did that would have been covered with blood. Andy lived with his mother. It was a very small apartment. Andy's mother said she didn't hear him come in late. When he came in, she didn't hear him take a shower. She didn't find any bloody clothes.
My father was not there. He was home in bed. Just like my memory said, she's not gonna lie. She's a French woman from Canada.
Andy really wouldn't stay away from the police. I mean, he was at the police station all the time saying, you know, I just thought of something. Maybe I can help you out on this. And they strung him along. I think he thought he was some kind of a junior G-man. I don't really know.
I found that people who commit homicide want to tell someone. It sounds strange, but they want to tell you what they did. Midnight, I think on a Friday or a Saturday evening, Andy Maltese came into our office.
Came in with his cowboy boots and his cowboy buckle and his shirts.
And he came in holding a Bible. I said, Andy, why the Bible?
And he said he was with God now, but prior to that, he'd been with the devil.
It was crazy. First of all, he didn't have a lawyer. And I'm not sure he would have listened to a lawyer at that point if he had one.
We gave him his Miranda warnings, his rights.
Andy just kept telling the police, as far as I recall, look, I know what I'm doing.
There was quite a bit of conversation about God and about Satan, and I really worked him over with that. But that went on for about 48 hours. We had no sleep. We just kept working that issue.
For whatever reason, he wanted to call it whatever you want, cooperate, participate. You know, he wanted to be involved with the police. He probably would have stayed there for 84 hours if they wanted him to.
Andy, he wasn't too bright, you know? You could talk him into saying he raped his own mother.
I want to be careful with my words because the police were just doing their job, but basically they played him.
I asked him to close his eyes, and I said, you know what I see, Andy? I see you killing Barbara. And that's when he said, you know, I can see it too. I can see in my mind where this body is. He wanted to take us there. Obviously, we did that.
When Andy wanted to go to the scene of where Barbara Raposa had been killed, we took him to the scene down there. It was a very, very cold day, and that's when he said, talking about having had his dream and seeing her smashed in the face and killed.
He claimed that he saw her murder in a vision. He's in a tree or he's hovering above the murder scene and he is witnessing that as if he is clairvoyant.
They turn it around against him. And also because he had a dream. What, you mean to tell me if I had a dream last night that God showed me something in a dream, which he does speak to people through dreams. Don't happen often, but it does happen. That's in his word. I'm not God, but that's his word.
I never considered it a confession, and I don't consider it a confession now.
We finally arrested Andy Maltese.
My dad was my best friend. I was looking for him. We had stayed in constant contact. You know, I was 19 years old. And we had plans to hook up and meet each other in Fall River. Well, I went to go meet him, and he was nowhere to be found. That's when I found out that they arrested him. They arrested him. I said, what do you mean they arrested him? They arrested him for murder. I said, you people are out of your mind. He didn't kill anybody.
And after Andy admitted to it, Robin came through with the full story.
Andy told me that Barbara was laying dead somewhere in the woods. And of course, I told him, no, she's probably just running away from you. He said, no, she is laying in the woods.
Andy Maltese told me a story that angels carried him over Barbara while she was being murdered. He said that Barbara was bludgeoned to death before she was found, that angels carried him over. She was in a wooded area, that she was tied up and beaten to death with a rock. When I told the police that, they said he had told them the same story. I said, well, if I was there, if I was in the car with them, is that good? Does that pick him up? And it did.
She turned around and said that she was in the car with Barbara and Andy.
Andy's statements didn't help him. Without Robin Murphy, they wouldn't have had a case at all. I thought she was lying from the first day I met her, but I could never get her into a position where she was so contradictory that it was obvious she was lying.
Andy Malte's lawyer asked me if I lied about Andy because of what he did to me when I was a kid. I didn't say he murdered Barbara because of what he did to me, but so that he couldn't do it to anyone else. And it worked. And in my mind, I figured, okay, if I say that, he'll go to jail. And then he can't molest any more little girls.
Her coming forward was definitely a way of fighting back and regaining some power in her life. Andy Maltese abused her, ruined her life, hurt her physically, emotionally, mentally.
Andy Maltese, he should have been castrated. He should have been castrated.
This is the site where the state says Andre Malte beat Barbara Raposa to death with a rock back in November of 1979.
The police took me to where she was found and basically said, so the car came in this way. You remember this bump over here? And I just, yep. That's it.
Robin, she was very smart. She's the best witness I ever saw.
I used to be a very good storyteller. And it got my needs met.
She had gone over the transcript. She had figured out what I was doing. But she was a very, very smart witness.
We watched him go in and out of the courthouse in a wheelchair because through all of this, he had a stroke. He had 3 strokes. The third one caused his whole left side to shut down, so he barely could walk.
He had strange sexual proclivities, shall we say. And the prosecution felt that they really needed to introduce some of this equipment in the trial.
Andy Maltese talked about a bag of tricks that he had. A bag of tricks were all sexual items that he used, vibrators and rope and handcuffs, and gags.
We had court stenographers, we had little old ladies in the back row, and they were shocked.
I know at the trial, Robin claimed Maltese had molested her when she was a child.
Andy Maltese, I don't know whether he saw it as wrong. I think he knew it was wrong, but it was a wrong that he could accept. It's not a wrong that you or I would accept, or most normal people would accept. But he was like, oh yeah, I did that. And he seemed detached. His general demeanor was just almost accepting of his own behavior. You know, he didn't see the world the way you and I do. It was disturbing to me to watch a man try and make sense of his life, and he couldn't. He just couldn't. It's kind of pathetic.
Andy ended up in state prison for the mentally impaired and died later of a stroke.
He always tried to be strong for us kids, but you could see the brokenness. You could see the suffering in him.
Did you ever meet Andy Maltese before all this happened?
No, I only met him that once and he was in a wheelchair and all that stuff. He raped Robin at the age of 11 years old and been fucking her ever since.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I told him, listen, you're an asshole.
Robin Murphy. You have her as the key witness in a homicide case, and now you have, the Karen Marsden murder.
My name is Maureen Murphy. I'm Robin's stepmother. What happened back then, whatever year it was, I don't remember anymore. I think it was so wrong. And Karen has been in my home. They were running colleges. They told that to my husband and myself.
Karen, she told me repeatedly that Carl was going to kill her. I didn't believe her. She really believed she was going to die. And she was right. Everybody else thought she was nuts.
On February 8th, Karen and I were all together. We parted ways. I went to Maureen Sparta's house, AKA Sunny. My intent that night was to cheat on Karen with Maureen Sparta. The next day, Karen didn't go back to her grandmother's, and I couldn't find her anywhere. I had talked to the state police. They couldn't do anything about it.
Carl said he was going to kill Karen.
You heard him say this?
Yes. I truly believe that Carl Drew killed Karen Marsden. Yes.
Carl Drew wasn't getting arrested for murdering the woman who said he was going to do it. I really wanted him to not hurt anybody else. That's all.
Grand jury murder indictments were handed down today for the death of 20-year-old Karen Marsden.
Ron Pena, who was the district attorney at the time, I'm sure he was under a lot of pressure to get this straightened out, so he corralled Robin.
We have an individual who has come forward and talked to us and has testified or spoken to us and identified exactly what we feel happened that night, and on a night when Karen Marsden disappeared.
We finally concocted a story of how she was killed.
I must have been a prime candidate to help them out with what they wanted to accomplish. And they also became that for me, unfortunately.
I mean, here they've got one witness that they can make one deal with that serves up on a silver platter 2 murders. You know, it solves everything.
I felt like the whole time they knew I really wasn't there because they wanted a body. Just tell us where the body is. You know how angry I got at that? How the hell do I know where the body is? I can't even tell you where her teeth are, and you want me to tell you where her body is.
When they found the skull, I went there. I drove to the scene with the state trooper. So I did know the layout, but not because I had ever been there before.
It's hard to explain. They just kind of guide you down a road. There's no way. There's just no way. They had to know what they were doing.
Prosecutors have an obligation to do justice, not just get convictions. But this was a DA who had a bunch of unsolved murders on his hands and who was approaching an election campaign. And he was far more interested in answering public outcry than he was in doing justice.
We were able to determine that there may have been more than one individual involved in the crime.
I actually was shown the photos of how they found her.
The assistant DA noticed when he showed me the pictures that I probably wasn't there.
When you're confessing to Karen's murder, why incorporate Satanism?
Oh, because the nice people said so.
Oh, the DA.
Yeah.
What did they say?
Yeah. Well, this was about giving souls to Satan and having ritualistic killings. And I was like, oh boy. You mean like carving up things? You'd be like, yeah, that was good. Okay.
Who's saying this?
Ronald Pena. And I know it sounds stupid now, but come on, you gotta go back to 1979. People don't worship the devil. You know what I mean?
Prosecutors in the mid-1980s who have been exposed to this satanic ritual narrative might be a lot more likely to assume that there's something devilly going on there.
The willingness by police officers and attorneys to embrace these stories is rooted in the fact that many of them were already primed by a literal Bible belief.
The city of Fall River, we had like 9 Catholic consecrated churches in the city, which was one of the largest anywhere in the United States.
They had been primed to believe in a God and a devil. They would naturally drift into the narrative that, well, Satan was behind this.
I felt like I was doing what people wanted me to do, solve these murders and have the people go to jail that committed the crimes. I plead guilty to murder in the 2nd degree. Kenny Sullivan, he told me I'll get out in 12 years. And I would like it at first because I'm gay. But did I think women would still want me at the age of 50? So I pled guilty that day. I was supposed to take the stand. Before I took the stand, they said, okay, you're going to testify about the Doreen Levesque murder. And I said, but I really don't know anything about it. I lied, I was never there. The assistant DA, whoever came in, went out frustrated. He came back with a bunch of people and said, you're going to tell this? You told me you were there. You already went before the grand jury. You're going to say you were there. This is what you saw, and that's it. That's what we agreed to.
You have a 16, 17-year-old girl who is very articulate and who could be prompted to say pretty much anything that people wanted her to say in order to have the headlines that these Fall River satanic cult murders were solved. Nothing to worry about, folks. We put the people away.
Without Robin, the district attorney didn't have Carl. It was almost like she was the prize to solve this serious crime and to put Carl away at whatever cost.
Robin Murphy looked a lot different in 1980 than she does today. In 1980, she looked like an innocent girl next door, and they intentionally dressed her up to look that part. You know, she's wearing little pleated skirts and, you know, button-up blouses, and her long hair is cascading over her shoulders, and she's talking about the horrific abuse she suffered at the hands of Carl Drew. I mean, who are you gonna believe?
Like I've been saying from day one, it's shame from the Fall River Police, the state police, and the Bristol County DA's office were all manipulated by this girl, Robin Murphy, that was implicated in 3 murders. You know what I mean? I'm like, what the hell, you know what I mean? My life's on the line for these people playing these games.
Just as we have a God, I do believe that we have a Satan. And I also believe that good always overcomes evil. That's just how I was raised. You know, there's a lot of questions, and they're probably all going to remain unanswered.
How are you feeling?
All right, a little nervous. I've never been on camera before, so.
Have you ever talked to the police?
Once. I was probably about maybe 10 or 11. My mother's house got raided, and they had arrested her. I don't even remember who the cop was, but I was talking to a cop, and I told him about what I saw, and I thought it might get my mother out of jail. I don't think he took me serious.
What did you see?
So when I was probably about, I don't know, 5 or 6, I had told my mother that I had saw these people killing a girl.
If I had a chance to say, would you want an investigation like that again? 3 homicides, connected, satanic cults, I'd say, are you crazy? It destroyed my life. I mean, I got divorced in the process, in the middle of it. It consumed me.
Carl Drew was initially charged with 2 murders, that of Doreen Levesque and Karen Marsden.
At that time, I believed in the legal system. You know what I mean? I figured that there's no way they're going to find me guilty.
Carl Drew was sentenced for all of his natural life to be imprisoned.
There were many aspects that corroborated Carl's innocent story that had been omitted or trampled under at trial.
Leah Johnson was Carl Drew's girlfriend, and she had Karen Marsden's ring. The ring placed Carl at the scene of the homicide.
We tracked down Leah Johnson, and she said, "Oh yeah, you know, the whole ring story, that's a bullshit story."
If I said in court it wasn't true.
Carol Fletcher, she was another prostitute. We spoke to her several times.
Carol witnessed Robin Murphy killing Karen Marsden.
They have, you know, made their case on Robin being a central figure in this and her being a main perpetrator instead of a victim.
Robin had a very rough upbringing, a very troubled background.
I was molested and raped by Andy Maltese, starting at age 11.
Andy was a pedophile, basically. He liked young girls.
Andy Maltese. He was going to give me a ride home. He repeatedly raped me.
He would drive around and find these young girls. People like that, they're predators.
I went to the police station and told them about Andy. They wouldn't even take my statement because I was only 12. They didn't care.
Were you pursuing him as a sex offender?
No.
You had, you know, girls being exploited, and they just weren't particularly concerned about the exploitation factor of those girls.
Barbara Raposa had gone to high school with Robin Murphy.
I really didn't know much about Barbara until we found her body.
Andy Maltese, I didn't say he murdered Barbara because of what he did to me, but so that he couldn't do it to anyone else. And it worked.
Without Robin Murphy, they wouldn't have had a case at all.
How do we know what is the truth today?
I don't think you do.
It does not stand to reason that one 17-year-old woman would be at 3 separate murders committed by separate men at separate times in separate places. It just doesn't make sense. How can one person be in all these places? What is she, Forrest Gump?
You see it every day now, all these cases, guys with 30, 40 years in getting their cases overturned. You know what I mean?
Lenny Bruce famously said that in the halls of justice, the only justice is in the halls. And this is one of those cases.
Carl Drew went to prison based entirely on the word of these women whose stories never matched up, not once, not ever, not once on the stand, not once in interviews with the cops. Nothing added up.
Mike Cutler was appointed to me as an attorney, and he ended up putting all this stuff together. We submitted it into court, you know.
A motion for new trial is designed to bring new evidence or evidence that wasn't admitted at trial into court so that a new trial motion judge can look at that evidence. And the judge granted that motion.
We were granted the evidentiary hearing. We produced the evidence. Everybody who said this is what happened recanted and said they were coerced.
Would you say that they were coaching you on what to say when you
Yes,
get on the
I
stand?
would say that.
You gave false testimony, correct?
I got a call from the assistant district attorney. He called me and asked me, could I go to the trial with them? And I said, yes, it's too important a case to have to retry.
These cases ultimately, unless you have forensic evidence, come down to a credibility contest. The witnesses, Fletcher and Johnson, were in tough shape, yet they kept it together and they showed up.
Now, you were never a Carl Drew fan, so you have no reason to tell me a story that he wasn't there. But the only reason you tell me is because he wasn't there, I assume.
Carol Fletcher, she said Carl shouldn't even be in jail at all.
I really didn't know Carl Drew from Adam, other than from what I heard from people.
She said he wasn't there What happened at the trial was that we were all coerced, we were all threatened that, you know, they'd put us in jail or whatever. She's like, and of course, we all have criminal backgrounds. We were probably all on probation. And so we just said whatever it was they wanted us to say.
There is some amount of witness manipulation that a prosecutor is permitted to do. It's just that telling someone that you're not going to send them to prison if they testify for you is inherently coercive.
Yeah, they wanted me to go on trial, and I kept on saying no. I was running from them when I was working down by the pier. So after they caught me, they pinned me in.
This is a class issue where poor people go to prison. They don't have access to defense attorneys. They don't have people clamoring for their release.
From the very beginning of this case, I've told these people that I couldn't read and I couldn't write and all that stuff. And they end up using that and took an advantage of that, knowing that I couldn't, you know, I couldn't understand a lot of the stuff that they were telling me about.
This is another example. In this particular case, you know, we would call it in Boston, here's a poor whiskey tango dude with no family, and it was very easy to railroad him into prison.
And they brought me to see the girl's head smashed in.
They actually showed you that?
Yeah, so many things.
They weren't the greatest witnesses in the world. They were vigorously cross-examined, Leah Johnson in particular, and as I recall correctly, she was sitting in the back of the courtroom. She nodded out and I think fell over, which certainly didn't enhance her credibility. All of the people who had been involved in the investigation were brought out of retirement or located. All these people were brought back to trial and said, you know, these are all drug-addicted street workers. You can't believe them.
They were very arrogant and adamant about trying to put this on Carl.
So would you say that they were coaching you on what to say when
Yes,
you got on the
I
stand?
would say that.
You say it definitely wasn't true.
It wasn't.
She was comfortable with us. We weren't intimidating her. We didn't have any problems with her. We got along with her very well.
Like I say, you know, once all this stuff started breaking down on them, they were so dumbfounded and ashamed, they didn't want to come right out and admit, you know what I mean?
The testimony of Carol Fletcher and originally Leah, everything fit in with the evidence that we found at the scene. We did get the rental car that Carol had driven with that group that night and had it tested by the State Police Crime Lab for blood. It never found any blood.
If they had taken Karen Marsden to the woods and chopped her head off and slit her throat, how on earth would they not get any blood in the car?
Well, if they didn't use that vehicle, if they used another vehicle, they could have gone back the next day.
Either the murder happened the way they said it happened or it didn't. And if you didn't find any blood in the car, then that's not how the murder happened. Right?
We didn't find any blood in the car because she was killed outside the car. And we didn't find any blood in the car because if the story, the rumors that we heard that she had been cut up and thrown in dumpsters.
If you cut someone's head off, you're going to have a lot of blood.
Yes, you are.
And if you get back into a car, you're going to get blood in the car.
Absolutely. But if
so then the story isn't true.
There's no physical evidence at all tying Carl Drew to these crimes. Not a single iota of physical evidence.
Karen was killed where she was killed off Robert Street, Family Beach in Westport. That's where her clothing was found. That's where her hair was found.
Couldn't her body have been dumped there?
No.
They know, the state cops know. They know what they did. They know what the DA wanted. They did what they had to do, and they're not going to change their mind about nothing now, you know?
That should have reopened this case and earned Carl Drew a new trial, but no one wants to relive this case.
I called Robin Murphy as our witness. I had her parole hearing in which she said she had lied.
When we talk about this crime, it's your position that you gave false testimony, correct?
There was a palpable sense of evil in the room, at least to my perception. And she spit out her testimony. And she couldn't deny the fact that she had recanted under oath at the parole hearing.
So you lied on the stand. Is there anyone called you on that?
Yes.
But she continued to express hostility towards Carl and tried to say that he had done it, despite her saying that he hadn't done it.
If there was a new trial granted, and you can't count on Robin's reliability and testimony, and Carol is now a defense witness, and Leah is a defense witness, then what evidence do you have? Because there wasn't a shred of actual evidence.
There's no evidence. There's no evidence that he's guilty. The only evidence was Robin Murphy and Carol Fletcher saying that they were there and saw it happen, and they've both denied it. I sure thought that if I had a straight-up judge, I should have been entitled to the benefit of the doubt. But I didn't have a straight-up judge.
They just completely shut it down. Me and Paul and Mike Cutler, we were shocked and amazed.
The judge who I was trying the new trial motion to, I later heard rumors was having lunch every day with the former prosecutor on the case to be sure that everything was going in copacetically.
No matter what was said at that hearing, because we had all the witnesses recanted, it didn't matter. The judge already, he was so quick at writing his decision. He knew that what he was going to do long before the thing even finished.
The judge said, you know what, the new trial isn't going to be granted. I mean, it's done. He'll stay in jail forever, and she'll still be able to go out and get parole if she can, and that's it. We don't want to hear it anymore. It was a fucking huge blunder.
It's been a difficult process for me to get into this case, a case I worked on for 11 years. It didn't work out for my client. Carl's done 40 years for something that he didn't do, and all of these other people have moved on. Carl's still in prison.
Carl has exhausted his appeals. He obviously thought he had a good case for an appeal that failed. He gets no more bite at the apple unless there's some new evidence that arises.
That was actually there the night of the murder, and he was young at the time. I knew his mother, you know what I mean? He thought I might have been his father because he was trying to find out who his father was, and he knew that I knew his mother, so he ended up finding my Facebook.
I lived in Harbor Terrace in the top row, 2 doors, 2 entryways down from Sonny. Father just wasn't in the picture, and in the project, that wasn't abnormal. And my mother, she died June 14th, 2013. And when she passed, I cleaned out her apartment and I found a baby book, which had like my first steps, when my first steps were, my first toy, and a picture of Carl Drew. He was the first one to come see me in the hospital. I found a Facebook page that Carl had, and he wanted me to go see him, so I did. I asked him if he might know who my father is, and then he ended up telling me there's a chance that he can be my father.
I don't know. I don't think so. But, I mean, like I say, it's in the realm of possibility because I did bang his mother and all that stuff.
My mother wasn't physically abusive, you know, but she, you know, she was a drug addict and a prostitute. And, you know, so I witnessed a lot of, like, fighting, a lot of different stuff. And I started acting up in school, and they recommended, they put me in, like, special needs. They didn't know what was wrong with me. They recommended me to do, like, counseling. So when I was probably about, I don't know, 5 or 6, I had told my mother that I saw these people up on the roof killing a girl. I saw 3 for sure.
And who are the 3 you saw?
I'm pretty sure one is Rob, and the other 2 I'm 100% sure was Sonny and Carl Davis.
So what did you see?
There's a lot of commotion, a lot of screaming. I don't remember how I got up there. There's a lot of yelling. I think I was crying.
And did you see Karen?
No, it's kind of a blur.
But she would have been...
She would have been dead. There was a woman on the roof that Carl Davis was holding back.
What did that mean to you?
Well, Carl Davis was probably pulling Robin off of Karen.
I'm waiting for Carl to call. He has limited access to email through a prison system, so I sent him an email and it takes him a while to get it, and then I have to wait till he gets phone time, and then he can call me at any minute, and I just kind of have to be on standby for when he calls. The witness is interesting because I'm not really sure what to believe. I mean, aside from the interview, I spent the whole day with him. You know, I was in Fall River. I spent the whole day with him. I went to lunch with him. I talked to him. I saw his ID. So there's no question he is who he says he is. And I really believe that he believes what he's saying. There's also the issue of him being presumably Carl's son, you know, so he has that motivation to kind of at least tailor his memory to want to help Carl. I don't think he's doing that on purpose, but it's possible. I think the challenge in all this is that everybody has a piece of the puzzle, and we have to step back and look at all the pieces and put that together into a collective story, and that's what tells you what happened. Okay, this is Carl.
Hello, this is a prepaid collect call from...
Oh, girl. Hello.
Carl. Hey. Carl, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, so I met with the witness, and he told me about the roof of Harbor Terrace, and I assume he's told you the same thing?
Yeah, well, like I said, he came up and visited me and all that stuff and was telling me this whole scenario, how he was there that night he was brought up there.
I do think there's another possibility that I want to ask you about, I guess.
All right.
So, starting with Doreen Levesque, she's the girl under the bleachers. She's killed first.
Right.
Doreen Levesque, her head and face was so badly distorted from the large stones that they all threw at her face.
She was tied up with fishing wire. Her head was crushed with rocks. She was posed in a sexual position. This is something that a male serial killer does to a woman, usually.
Then right after Doreen Levesque, like within 25 days, Barbara Raposa is killed. And those two murders are not just similar, they are the same.
Yeah.
Her hands were tied behind her back also. And they had smashed her in the face with the rock, and her face was completely smashed in.
You felt as an investigator that the same person had committed both murders?
Yes.
What always confused me is that Robin claims that two different people committed these murders.
Yeah.
Robin said that you killed Doreen Levesque, and she knows that because Karen told her.
Right.
Karen, she said that Carl killed the girl under the bleachers. I insisted, nah, he just told you that to get you to walk right. And she told me she was there when it happened.
And then she said that Andy killed Barbara Raposa.
Yeah.
Andy Maltese told me a story that angels carried him over Barbara while she was being murdered.
It just seems very strange that Robin would be told by two different people about separate murders committed by different killers with no connection to each other. But when you look at the murders, they seem to be exactly the same.
Yes, it is. It does seem very strange, doesn't it?
You know, Andy, he always said he wasn't there. I always thought there was something about that he didn't tell me, but I couldn't get it out of him.
So I just want to put this out there.
Yeah.
I think Andy Maltese killed both Doreen and Barbara. Stick with me. So if you look at the location of Barbara and Doreen's murder, they are within miles of each other, and Andy Maltese lives directly in the middle of them.
Really?
So that could be a coincidence, but that would be a huge coincidence that two young women would be murdered in the exact same way within 6 miles of each other and both within 2 miles of Andy's house. You met Andy at one point, right?
The only time I met him was when he was in Walpole, not too long before he died.
Walpole's the name of a prison, right?
Yeah, that was back in the day. That was one of the toughest joints in Massachusetts, you know, Walpole State Prison.
Okay.
But he was his worst known enemy anyway, you know what I mean? He was just a blabbering idiot, you know what I mean? He would say things to agitate people and all that stuff.
Okay, well, get this. The police knew Andy had a criminal history that is very similar to these murders.
Really?
When I had heard that my dad had raped some woman and heard that he was a pedophile and mentally unstable, I started researching it. So I says, well, I'm gonna dig a little deeper. So I called my mother. She says, when I got together with your dad, she said he was just coming out of jail. I said, jail for what? And she says, well, he got a charge for rape.
Andy had a background of doing things like that. He was arrested up in the Freetown State Forest by the state police back in 1957 for picking up girls from a junior high in Fall River and taking them up to what they call the forest, attempting to rape or raping the girls. And my former station commander is one of the people that arrested him. He did some house correction time on that.
Back then, things would slip through the cracks. We didn't have the computer databases that we have today. People moved from one town to the next, not just Andy, and there was really no way to track them. It just simply got overlooked.
They leave assholes like that in society, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and the crazy thing is that both Doreen and Barbara were tied at their hands and ankles with what they called a white twisted twine, and when you look into it more, it was a white fishing line. And not only is it the same at both murder scenes, but Andy had that in the trunk of his car when they searched it.
Right.
Andy Maltese, he had a bag of tricks that were all sexual items that he used, vibrators and rope and handcuffs.
And I spoke to one of his victims, and she said that Andy would do the same thing to her.
Andy had a freshwater fishing pole, I remember that. He had rope in his trunk of his car with his sicko sex toys. He would use rope on me, tie me up, my wrists to my ankles. I was petrified. I was petrified. So Andy killing both Doreen and Barbara makes sense, especially considering that he was the one who was originally suggesting that you were the killer of Doreen Levesque.
What?
Andy Maltese, he knew a state police officer that I had worked with, and he went to the state police officer and said he knew something about the Levesque murder. So I met him one day, we snuck him into the state police barracks in Dartmouth and talked to him, and when he got there, he said, well, I don't really know anything.
Didn't you consider him a suspect in the Doreen Levesque murder?
Well, yes, but then he brought Robin and Karen Marsden in. They came out with the story about Carl Drew having done it.
Andy associated with all those girls, Barbara, Robin, Karen Marsden. I never really understood that.
So if Andy killed Doreen and Barbara, that still leaves us with Karen Marsden.
Right.
And the thing about Karen is that she had told lots of people that she witnessed the first murder.
Yeah.
Karen, she admitted that she was there at Doreen Levesque's killing.
She said that to you?
Yeah, she said that she was there. They made her go.
She didn't say who it was?
No.
Or who was
she
there?
didn't. No.
Myself and Alan had her in the station house with regard to these murders. And she was so scared, she didn't want to even talk about it. She was scared to death. She would never say what she knew, but she was definitely at the scene.
So in that case, Karen saw Andy kill Doreen Levesque and could potentially testify against him. And there's actually a record to support that. Karen's grandmother actually told the Fall River Police that Andy had threatened Karen before she was killed. Andy told her that he thought he might be arrested for the murder of Barbara, and that if he was, he felt Karen's safety was in jeopardy. So Andy had threatened Karen's grandmother that Karen might be hurt if he was arrested,
Right.
and the crazy part is that's exactly what happened.
Basically, yeah.
So the police knew that Andy and Karen had this relationship and that Andy had threatened Karen, but they never investigated. They thought Andy had an alibi. They thought Andy was in jail at the time of Karen's murder.
Right.
But in Massachusetts at the time, if you were arrested, you had to be arraigned within 24 hours, and Andy's lawyer had arranged for bail.
Really?
The first time I met Andy, he was already in court. He was in the prisoner's area. So I went over, I told him who I was, told him to be quiet, and I told him I would either arrange for bail or I'd have to go see him at the jail. But whatever happened, just to be quiet. And he was arraigned, and I did arrange for bail for him.
I even called the Fall River District Court, and they looked up Andy's records for me, and they confirmed that Andy was released on February 8th, hours before the murder of Karen Marsden. Hello?
Yeah.
Andy Maltese, his general demeanor was just almost accepting of his own behavior. You know, he didn't see the world the way you and I do.
When you look at the autopsy reports for all three women, even though they never found Karen's body, they found her skull. And on Karen's skull, there was a crush injury. Essentially, her skull was crushed kind of right on her left forehead, which is exactly the same as the other two murders. All three women died of a skull fracture with a large blunt object. So as far as we know, Karen is killed in the exact same way as Doreen, the exact same way as Barbara, and Andy has a motive to kill her and no alibi for her murder.
Right.
So that still leaves us with the witness on the roof of Harbor Terrace.
Yeah, yeah.
You remember being on the roof, and that's the murder that Carl is convicted of.
Yes. He was not there.
You're 100%.
100% sure he was not on that roof.
How sure are you that Robin was on the roof?
I know for a fact that Carl Davis and Sonny was on the roof. Carl Davis was holding somebody. And I'm pretty sure that was Robin.
I mean, there's a lot of possibilities there, right? Maybe the witness got the day wrong, maybe he's off by a year, maybe he was 4, not 5. He wasn't even 100% sure that Robin was on the roof. He said it was probably Robin.
Right.
You'd met Carl Davis, right?
Yeah, he died not so long ago. Someone gave him a hot shot of dope. You know what I mean?
Did you know he was involved with Robin or Karen or Andy?
I have no idea. Like I said, I didn't even know that even existed and all that stuff. Like I said, I never dealt with Robin Murphy or Andy Maltese or Carl Davis.
So I've been talking to Robin through email. She gets a limited amount of email at the prison. And I've really been pushing her to let me come back and interview her on camera, and she's agreed.
Right.
I have not told her all this. I have not told her about the witness. I've not told her all this stuff about Andy. I don't even know if she knows about Andy's criminal history.
Yeah.
I want to tell her in person and give her a chance to either explain herself or maybe fill in something else that we're missing. She knew Andy the best out of anyone, unfortunately.
Right.
So I'm gonna fly to Boston and go back into the prison and interview her on camera this time.
You have 1 minute left.
All right.
But either way, I mean, to me, I see all this as just more proof of your innocence, and so I think we need to get this to someone.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, good.
Thank you, buddy. I love you, man.
Thanks, man. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
There she is. Am I turned on?
You are.
Okay.
So have you been here for a while?
Well, we got here about noon, so about 2 hours. Yeah. Ready? So how did you meet Andy in the first place?
Andy gave me a ride one day during a snowstorm. That's how I met him.
What happened?
If we could just move from that, I would appreciate it. Yeah.
Did you know that Andy had been to prison before he met you?
What? Okay. I never heard that before until this very moment.
Did you ever suspect that he was involved in the Doreen Levesque?
No.
Because there are police reports where you talk about Andy being with Doreen Levesque and even tell the police that you think Andy killed Doreen Levesque. Do you remember that?
I may have felt that way. I think that period of time involved a lot of odd things, a lot of strange things. I did my best to sort out what was real and what was scare tactics, I guess. Specifics and details about different conversations and things. Sorry, it was 40 years ago. It's kind of hard to keep track of.
It looks to me like he probably killed Doreen Levesque.
Possible, yes. The case with Barbara and Doreen, they are both extremely similar. When Barbara was missing, he wanted to know if I had seen her, and he insisted she was missing and something bad happened to her. Then he told me about the dream. He said she was dead, she was tied up, she was bludgeoned to death with a rock. He knew everything before they found her. Everything.
One of the first times you had any contact with police was when Andy took you and Karen in together, right?
Yes. I know that I thought we were going for one reason, and it was really something else. It was very odd. It was very odd, and I do not remember the specifics.
Andy said, if I'm arrested, something's going to happen to Karen.
Really?
What was Andy's relationship to Karen?
I don't know. I know that when I was in the hospital, one of the many times I was in the hospital, Andy came in with Karen, or Karen came in with Andy, and I was curious what they were doing together. And she said, oh, he just gave me a ride. I don't know where they met. I don't know any of that.
Did you ever confide in Karen about what had happened with Andy?
Yes.
What was her reaction?
I really don't recall.
Yeah.
I know that we had a few discussions. I remember seeing him in a one-piece pajama set. He was knee-high to a grasshopper.
I talked to him, and he said that he was on the roof of Harbor Terrace and saw you arguing, you, Karen, and Sonny, and Carl Davis.
I have a question before you go any further.
Yeah.
His age now versus his age in February of 1980, is he old enough to be up on a roof?
He would have been extremely young.
It didn't happen, which is why I just asked you that. I remember him being really small. That's why I asked you how old he was. I've never been on the roof of Harbor Terrace, so I was at Sonny's at 5 Harbor Terrace. Across the next building down, Carol Fletcher lived there. Somebody sold me weed once on the 2nd floor of that building, and a woman by the name of Gail lived in the last building. That's what I know about Harbor Terrace. I'm not into closets and rooftops and basements. I don't know anything about that. I'm sorry. I told a lot of stories a long time ago, and I don't tell stories anymore. Some people continue to tell stories. I don't know why. I don't know what the cause is. I don't know if they believe their own lies. I don't know. But I do know that I'm telling the truth. And I'm sorry if anyone tries to taint that.
Andy was actually arraigned on February 8th, and he was released hours before Karen's murder.
I wasn't aware of that neither. He was arrested.
I'm telling you all this because I'm wondering if it triggers anything in your memory. Like, wait a sec, now I do remember.
No, you're actually blowing my mind with all this information. I did not know any of it and wasn't aware of it, certainly, but I never even considered it.
What do you think now? Do you think it's possible?
I think that, do I think it's possible? Anything's possible. Anything at all is possible.
It seems like he had so little insight into what he was doing that he'd almost traumatized you to make you feel like you were complicit in what he was doing.
Right.
You know, is that, you think that's accurate?
I absolutely do. Before he passed, he sent me a letter from prison, and he said he only tried to make a woman out of me. I think that for someone to say that about an 11-year-old, 12-year-old, you know, he had a rifle in the trunk of the car, and he took it out one day and shot at my feet. And initially, I remember feeling, like, really afraid. And he was like, oh, I was only kidding. I've never forgotten that. And I believe I told the police about that. And it just didn't matter. None of that mattered. And now you're telling me, oh yeah, no, he does that stuff. What? That's crazy. Why didn't he ever kill me? That is so weird.
When was the last time you saw Karen?
February 8th. We parted ways after leaving her son's foster parents' house.
And that was it?
I never saw her again.
Yeah.
Because I never saw her again after going to Sonny's house. That still bothers me. A lot.
That's what's so complicated about this entire, history of the Fall River Satanic Cult murders. I mean, who are you going to believe?
There may be things that I don't want to talk about, but that's for personal reasons, not because I have anything really to hide. But I've been telling the truth for a long time. It's not sensational.
They let this girl, Robin Murphy, manipulate them for her own gain. You know what I mean? Like I said, and I want that story out there that, by her own volition, that she admitted that she lied and she made this stuff all up.
The DA acquiesced to the need for public closure and didn't necessarily have the interests of justice at heart.
When we find that injustice has been done, somebody's been wrongly accused, I think we have to commit ourselves 1,000% to trying to right that wrong, to undo the damage, to restore reputations, to make things whole again.
Trying to get like the innocent projects to really step on and all that shit.
Right now, I'm waiting to see if they're gonna step up and take the case. I mean, you get cases every day you see it overturned with lesser issues than I got. You know what I mean? It's just like they're afraid to admit that they were wrong.
At the present moment, we have 43 domestic cases of the coronavirus. 6 Americans have lost their life to the coronavirus, and on behalf of the President and all of the American people, we extend our deepest condolences.
Because of the President's strong leadership and all of the hard work that our public health professionals have done at the local, the state, the federal level, the immediate risk to any individual American has been and does continue to be low.
What's going on? Are you locked down or?
Yeah, they only let us out for a half hour a day, so, and actually, it's actually safer that way, you know what I mean? The last thing I want to do is get this shit. I'll try to call you later, they just told us to lock in.
We've already seen 126,000 deaths, with infection rates rising rapidly.
You got this idiot Trump, he's opening everything up and all this, all these states. It's just going to come back and start spreading again.
It's going to disappear. One day it's like a miracle, it will disappear.
I lost smell and taste. Yeah. Oh, it was inevitable, you know what I mean? So, yeah, that, you know, the bone chills and all that stuff.
Are you getting any treatment?
No, I'm good. Yeah, I mean, I didn't want to deal with all that stuff.
So did Carl Drew belong in prison for what he did as a pimp? Absolutely. Does he belong in prison on the word of a liar with no physical evidence? Maybe, but at the very least, we should be giving him an opportunity to be retried with a fair trial and an adequate counsel.
No question in my mind that he is not innocent. He committed the crimes. He was present. He committed the crimes. I believe justice was served.
My first impression was that the case at trial appeared to be a mess. And then as we looked into more evidence, it seemed to raise a lot of red flags and a lot of questions. I think that the evidence that Carl has uncovered over the past 30+ years and that this documentary has uncovered is compelling and significant evidence that Carl did not commit this crime.
I think that it's worthy to take a look at this case and to raise some real questions about how something like this could be prosecuted in the manner that it was.
Legally, Carl is in a tricky situation because he has to find more evidence and new evidence and evidence that's different than what was presented in the motion in 2004. But I think that there is evidence that has been uncovered that is different. Robin Murphy's statement that she also was told on the day of trial by the prosecutor that she needed to testify to what they agreed to, even after she was trying to tell him that she lied, I think is very compelling.
I was supposed to take the stand. Before I took the stand, I lied. I was never there. The DA came in, went out frustrated. He came back with a bunch of people and said, "You're going to tell this? You told me you were there. You already went before the grand jury. You're going to say you were there. This is what you saw, and that's it. That's what we agreed to."
I am concerned about getting a judge to take it seriously, being that a judge had already discredited Robin Murphy. But on top of that, from what this documentary has uncovered, is that in the police's investigation into the Barbara Raposa murder against Andre Maltese, the police had arrested Andre Maltese in the past for committing crimes with a very similar MO, a very similar method to the way that Doreen Lebec was killed. This information about Andre Maltese was never turned over to Carl or his defense team. Before a person is convicted, the defense is supposed to receive all evidence that is both against them and evidence that may show that they didn't commit the crime. And when evidence isn't turned over, the law essentially supports Carl, saying, how was I supposed to know that it existed?
Carl Drew, I think it's hard for him to dispute that he was a pimp who prostituted little girls. However, the people who belong in prison have to be put there in the correct way, according to the rule of law.
To overturn his conviction, I have to show that all of this information might have made a difference to the jury, that it would have been a significant factor as they tried to determine, did Carl commit this crime or did someone else? One big thing that Carl was lacking was significant evidence of a third-party culprit, of the other person who may have actually killed her. And it seems clear from what the documentary has uncovered that this information about Andre Maltese, that might be a basis to get Carl back into court and to overturn his convictions. We need to file a motion for new trial.
Robin's history of trauma and also going to prison at 17, 18 years old and serving most of her life in confinement, you know, is traumatic in and of itself. So it's trauma after trauma after trauma and a coping mechanism, you know, to deal with all of that. You know, I think she doesn't trust people, so therefore she comes off as untrustworthy to the parole board.
You've woven this web of deceit and storytelling that I can't make heads or tails of what even the surface of the truth is in this case.
I think it's evident that she was an abuse victim by multiple people. You know, she may have had street smarts, but that doesn't mean that she had common sense or that she had the emotional maturity to deal with, you know, what was going on around her. I think she deserves re-parole.
Here's what's so sad about this case. What you absolutely know for a fact is that you had these men who were victimizing teenage girls. I mean, that alone should have provoked some sort of investigation. These were all girls that should have been offered some sort of protection.
I think what you're doing and what your team's doing here is the only way, is to shed some light onto it. Maybe, you know, there's some people who were former district attorneys who, you know, feel bad about it. Maybe there are some people who worked on the case who would like to make things right. And if 100,000 people or so see this, or people in Fall River realize that, hey, I think it warrants an investigation into it. Go ahead, let's test the shit. Why not? Why not look up the cases, do due diligence and just get to the truth of the situation?